Welcome back, my friend. Tonight we're stepping into a North American winter long before electric heaters, insulated glass, gas furnaces, or thermostats existed. Snow is already gathering against the trees, and the evening wind carries a cold sharp enough to sting exposed skin. Yet somewhere beyond the dark forest, families are settling into homes that can remain surprisingly comfortable through dangerous winter weather. How did they manage it? How could structures made from earth, timber, bark, grass, or animal hides protect people when temperatures plunged far below freezing? The answer is more ingenious than simply keeping a large fire burning. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you are listening from and what your local time is. Now, dim the lights and imagine yourself standing beneath a winter sky filled with slow, drifting snow. The first thing you notice is the silence. Summer insects have disappeared, migrating birds are gone, and frozen ground muffles your footsteps. Wind moves through bare branches with a low whisper that seems to surround you. Your breath hangs briefly before your face. The cold does not merely touch your skin here. It presses through clothing, settles around your fingers, and creeps steadily toward your feet. For indigenous peoples living across colder regions of North America, winter was never a minor inconvenience. It shaped decisions about shelter, clothing, food, travel, fuel, family organization, and settlement location. And there was no single Native American solution. That distinction matters immediately. North America contained hundreds of culturally distinct indigenous nations living across enormously different environments. Winter beside the Great Lakes was not winter in the northern plains or the high deserts. Communities, therefore, developed homes suited to particular landscapes, rather than following one universal architectural tradition. Some built substantial earth-covered lodges, others lived inside bark-covered longhouses, timber structures, portable hide dwellings, or homes partly protected by surrounding soil. Each design answered different environmental pressures. The popular idea that Native American houses somehow never froze is therefore an exaggeration. Interiors could become painfully cold, fires could weaken, storms could overwhelm preparations, and winter remained genuinely dangerous. Yet the interesting truth survives beneath that exaggeration. Many traditional dwellings were exceptionally well adapted to their environments. You begin understanding why when you stop imagining a house as a modern heated box. Instead, imagine shelter as one component within an entire system for conserving human warmth. The goal is not necessarily keeping every corner pleasantly warm. The goal is keeping people warm enough. That difference changes everything. A modern household may heat empty rooms, hallways, ceilings, furniture, and large volumes of unused air. In many traditional winter dwellings, warmth concentrates much closer to the people who actually need it. Spaces can be smaller and lower. Sleeping areas can be heavily insulated. Families can gather around carefully controlled hearths, rather than spreading themselves through separate rooms. Your own body becomes part of the heating system. An adult human quietly produces heat every moment, even while resting. Put several people together inside a protected space, and their combined warmth becomes noticeable. Add cooking, warm bedding, insulating clothing, and a modest fire, and conditions improve considerably. The principle sounds almost too simple, but simplicity can be powerful. Now imagine yourself approaching a winter settlement after sunset. You smell wood smoke before individual structures become clear through the falling snow. The scent is dry, earthy, and slightly sweet. A faint glow escapes from an opening somewhere ahead, while snow crunches softly beneath your feet. You might expect enormous fires roaring continuously inside every dwelling. That assumption would often be wrong. Firewood requires labor. Someone must locate it, cut or break it, carry it home, protect it from moisture, and manage its consumption through months of cold weather. A shelter that wastes heat also wastes human effort. So architecture matters before the first flame is ever lit. A dwelling exposed directly to strong winter winds loses warmth quickly. One protected by terrain, vegetation, surrounding structures, or thoughtful orientation can perform very differently. Even snow itself can become useful. Snow contains trapped air, which gives it insulating properties. When it accumulates around lower portions of a structure, it can reduce exposure to moving cold air. Of course, too much snow creates other problems. Roofs must carry weight, entrances must remain accessible, and moisture becomes troublesome whenever melting begins. Winter shelter is always a negotiation. You are not defeating nature. You are working with it. This is one of the most important ideas to carry through the night. Traditional builders often relied upon generations of observations about local winds, soil, vegetation, snowfall, sunlight, and seasonal movement. Knowledge accumulated because mistakes could become memorable very quickly. Build where winter winds strike relentlessly, and you notice. Choose damp ground, and you notice. Create poor ventilation above a fire, and everyone inside notices rather dramatically. There is some gentle irony here. A house without a thermostat requires you to become remarkably interested in thermodynamics. No equations are necessary. Your freezing toes provide excellent feedback. One widespread principle involves insulation. Although historical communities naturally described and understood materials through their own traditions rather than modern engineering vocabulary, Earth is especially interesting. Soil does not behave like exposed winter air. Temperatures underground fluctuate more slowly than temperatures above the surface. That makes partially underground or heavily earth-covered structures useful in environments where such construction is practical. The soil becomes a massive thermal buffer. Outside temperatures might change rapidly between afternoon and midnight, while surrounding Earth changes far more slowly. Timber adds structure. Grass, reeds, bark, hides, and other materials can reduce drafts or create additional insulating layers. Layers matter because trapped air matters. You already understand this instinctively from clothing. Several carefully arranged layers often protect you better than one thin covering, because still air trapped between materials slows heat transfer. Buildings can exploit similar principles. A quirky detail appears repeatedly across human winter architecture. Not only in North America, people sometimes discover that humble materials such as grass, moss, reeds, or packed vegetation perform important thermal jobs. The expensive-looking material is not always the clever one. Dry plant matter can trap considerable air, placed appropriately within or around structural layers. It helps separate warm interior surfaces from bitter exterior conditions. Yet historians and archaeologists still debate many details concerning exactly how particular indigenous homes were occupied during the coldest periods. Archaeological remains preserve posts, hearths, floor patterns, storage pits, and structural traces more readily than daily sensations. A post hole cannot tell you whether someone felt comfortably warm at midnight. Written accounts can help, but they bring problems of their own. European observers sometimes misunderstood what they encountered. They might visit briefly, describe unfamiliar architecture through European assumptions, or overlook seasonal modifications that local families considered ordinary. Even the word comfortable becomes slippery. Comfort according to whom? Someone accustomed to sleeping beside a modern radiator might find a historical dwelling astonishingly cold. Someone wearing suitable winter clothing beneath thick coverings may judge that same temperature entirely manageable. So you should not picture tropical warmth inside these homes. Picture controlled survival instead. Picture the difference between dangerous exposure and protected cold. Outside, wind can pull heat rapidly from your body. Inside, the air's calmer, your clothing stays drier. Bedding traps warmth, and nearby people contribute additional heat. A small fire changes the balance further. You begin to understand why stopping drafts can sometimes matter almost as much as generating heat. Moving air is relentless. It enters tiny openings, replaces warmed interior air, and carries precious heat away. Traditional builders therefore paid close attention to coverings, seams, entrances, wall thickness, and the shape of shelters. Some structures included entrance arrangements that reduced direct wind penetration. Others could be adjusted as weather conditions changed. Portable homes required different compromises from permanent ones. A farming community able to invest substantial labour into a large winter dwelling faced different choices than highly mobile hunters following seasonal resources. Neither solution is automatically more advanced. They solve different problems. This becomes especially clear when you look across the continent. On the plains, portability could be enormously valuable for communities whose lives required movement. In agricultural settlements, substantial earth lodges could justify months or years of continued maintenance. Farther east, timber and bark were readily available in many forest environments. In the southwest, earthen architecture responded to another combination of seasonal heat. Cold nights, available materials, and social organization. Northern environments produce still other adaptations. The continent becomes a laboratory of winter architecture. Not literally, of course. Nobody is standing outside with a clipboard while the snow piles higher. Still, generations of practical experience create something resembling continuous experimentation. A roof angle works, a wall covering fails, an entrance catches too much wind, a certain sleeping position remains warmer. Knowledge passes between parents, children, relatives, builders, and neighbours. Over decades and centuries, successful habits become traditions, and traditions carry survival information quietly. You can hear that knowledge around you now. Someone adjusts material near an entrance as the wind changes. Another person adds a small piece of fuel to the central fire. Children settle closer to relatives. A cooking vessel gives off a warm, earthy smell, mingling with smoke and the scent of hides and timber. Nothing feels accidental. Even the interior arrangement can help determine how warmth moves. Warm air rises, which means very tall unused spaces can collect heat where nobody sleeps. Compact shelters reduce the volume that a fire and human bodies must influence. Sleeping closer to protected walls or raised surfaces can also reduce exposure to cold ground. The ground is particularly important. Lie directly against frozen soil and your body steadily transfers heat downward. Place insulating materials beneath yourself, and that transfer slows. Dry grass, woven mats, hides, robes, or other bedding can therefore perform work that modern people might expect from a heated room. Your bed becomes a tiny climate. Your clothing becomes another. The dwelling surrounds both. These overlapping layers explain much more than any mythical ability to ignore cold. Native American winter survival depended upon technology, and much of that technology looked deceptively ordinary. A hide is technology. A woven mat is technology. A carefully positioned roof opening is technology. Knowing where to build is technology too. There is no need to romanticize hardship to appreciate that intelligence. People still became cold. Storms still killed. Food shortages still happened. Fuel could become scarce. And unexpected weather could test even experienced communities. But surviving winter did not require maintaining a modern indoor temperature. It required controlling heat loss intelligently. As you sit near the fire, the distinction becomes almost physical. Your face feels faint warmth from the flames while your back remains cooler. Beneath you, layers of dry material separate your body from the frozen earth. Outside, the wind continues. Inside, it becomes only a distant sound. The shelter has not made winter disappear. It has slowed winter down. Cold must now pass through earth, wood, bark, vegetation, hides, trapped air, clothing, and bedding before reaching vulnerable skin. Every layer buys time. Every barrier conserves energy. Every thoughtful decision reduces the amount of fuel required to remain alive and functional. And before builders choose those materials, they must make an even earlier decision. They must decide where the home belongs. Ahead of you, beyond the warm circle of firelight, lies the landscape that determines everything. Hills interrupt winds. Forests alter exposure. Sunlight touches certain slopes longer, and water influences where people can safely remain. So you pull your covering a little closer and listen to the storm moving beyond the walls. The first secret of a warm winter house begins outside it. It begins with the ground beneath your feet. You step outside again, leaving the sheltered warmth behind, and immediately understand why location matters so much. The wind reaches you first. It slides across the frozen landscape, catches loose snow, and sends tiny crystals brushing against your cheeks. Your eyes narrow instinctively while your shoulders rise beneath your winter covering. A few hundred steps away, however, the same wind feels noticeably weaker. Trees interrupt its path there. A low rise blocks another portion, while the ground slopes gently toward a protected hollow. Without moving indoors, you have already entered a slightly different winter environment. This is where choosing a home begins, before walls can conserve warmth. The surrounding landscape can reduce how much warmth those walls must defend. Indigenous communities understood these local differences through accumulated experience with particular territories. The knowledge could become extraordinarily detailed. A hillside might look perfectly ordinary during summer but become miserable once winter winds arrive. Another location might receive valuable afternoon sunlight while remaining protected from the strongest prevailing winds. Water complicates the decision further. People need reliable access to drinking water, food resources, transportation routes, and useful vegetation, yet low. Wet ground can become uncomfortable. While exposed shorelines may receive powerful winter winds, there is rarely one perfect location. Instead, you balance competing needs. Imagine walking beside an experienced builder while snow covers much of the landscape. You see only white ground and dark trees, but your companion notices far more. The direction of drifting snow reveals prevailing winds. Tree growth suggests repeated exposure. The slope reveals where melting water may travel. Nearby vegetation hints at soil conditions, fuel availability, and useful construction materials. Even sunlight becomes part of the calculation. During northern winters, the sun remains lower in the sky and daylight becomes precious. A location receiving more direct winter sunlight can gain modest but useful warmth. The effect should not be exaggerated. Sunlight alone will not transform a freezing shelter into a summer afternoon. Yet survival often depends upon combining many small advantages rather than discovering one miraculous trick. A little less wind helps, a little more sunlight helps. Drier ground helps too. Together, those differences matter. Across North America, settlement patterns varied enormously because environments and cultural traditions varied with them. Some communities occupied substantial villages, while others moved seasonally between locations selected for particular resources. Winter could encourage concentration in protected places. Among several plains peoples, seasonal movement allowed communities to respond to grazing animals, fuel supplies, water, hunting conditions, and shelter from severe weather. Elsewhere, agricultural villages represented long-term investments in particular landscapes. You begin to see why calling all these structures simply Native American houses hides tremendous diversity. A Mandan Earth Lodge and an Eastern Longhouse answer different needs. A Plains teepee solves another problem entirely. Southwestern earthen architecture responds to yet another environment, including cold nights that surprise visitors who imagine deserts as permanently hot. The landscape writes part of every design. Your feet crunch across another patch of snow. Here the surface feels harder. Wind has swept away much of the loose powder, leaving exposed crust beneath you. Such signs can reveal how relentlessly air moves through a location. Now you descend behind a ridge. Almost immediately the sound changes. The constant rush becomes a softer murmur above you. Snow settles more evenly, and nearby shrubs stand without being bent by every gust. The temperature may be similar. Your body does not experience it similarly. Wind dramatically increases heat loss from exposed skin and can pull warmed air away from surfaces. A shelter exposed to continuous airflow also struggles to retain heat when drafts penetrate its coverings. Protection from wind therefore reduces a major winter burden. This principle is ancient and wonderfully unglamorous. Sometimes survival begins with standing behind something. Forests can provide that protection, although they create their own considerations. Trees offer timber, branches, bark, and fuel, depending upon region and species. They can also reduce wind near the ground, but large trees may fall during storms, dense shade can limit sunlight, and forest conditions influence snow accumulation in complicated ways. Experienced communities did not simply choose somewhere with trees, they learned particular places. That knowledge was often transmitted orally and practically rather than preserved in architectural manuals. A child growing within a community could absorb landscape knowledge through repeated seasonal experience. You learn where snow becomes deepest. You learn where water remains accessible. You remember where the wind screams all night. No textbook is required. One curious winter trick involves snowdrifts themselves. Modern campers sometimes deliberately use snow as a wind barrier because dense banks can block moving air. Historical communities living in snowy environments could likewise benefit when accumulation formed around appropriately designed shelters. But snow is an unreliable friend. It insulates, yet it also adds weight. It blocks wind, yet it can obstruct entrances. Melting snow introduces moisture, and moisture can make cold conditions considerably harder to manage. This is why simple claims about traditional winter architecture often become misleading. Nothing works independently. Historians continue debating how deliberately certain settlement orientations were selected for thermal advantage rather than for defense. Water, ceremony, kinship, or other priorities. Archaeological layouts can reveal where structures stood, but intention is harder to recover. A doorway facing one direction might reduce winter wind. It might also face a central plaza. Perhaps both considerations mattered. Human beings rarely organize settlements according to a single neat explanation. Still, environmental adaptation is visible throughout many traditions. Consider substantial earth lodge villages along portions of the Missouri River. Communities including the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara constructed impressive timber frame structures covered with layers of vegetation and earth. These villages depended upon agriculture as well as hunting and trade. Their homes represented serious investments of labor. Choosing appropriate ground therefore mattered greatly. You cannot casually move an earth lodge because Tuesday feels breezier than expected. The structure belongs to its landscape. Farther east, woodland communities had access to forests providing abundant structural materials. Bark could become a remarkably useful covering when properly harvested and arranged. Wooden frameworks shaped enclosed spaces. Local geography influenced village placement, while nearby forests supplied fuel and building resources. Again, warmth begins beyond the wall. Now you notice another factor beneath your boots. Drainage. A dry shelter is far easier to keep comfortable than a damp one. Water conducts heat more effectively than still air, while wet clothing and bedding lose much of their insulating usefulness. Damp interior conditions can therefore become a serious winter problem. Selecting ground where water drains appropriately reduces that risk. A slight elevation can sometimes help. Too much elevation, however, may increase exposure to wind. The perfect site becomes another balancing act. You are beginning to think like someone who cannot simply adjust a thermostat. Every decision has consequences. Even proximity to fuel matters. Imagine maintaining a winter fire while every useful branch lies several exhausting miles away. Carrying wood through deep snow consumes calories precisely when your body already requires extra energy. A settlement near dependable fuel reduces that burden. Some communities stored fuel ahead of severe weather. Others used locally abundant materials according to environmental conditions and established practices. Wood quality also matters. Different species burn differently, producing varying amounts of heat, smoke, sparks, and lasting coals. Dry fuel is especially valuable. The smell of wood smoke drifting from the settlement now seems less ordinary. Behind that gentle scent lies hours of gathering, carrying, drying, sorting, and protecting fuel. Winter warmth is labor stored in wooden form. You walk toward the edge of the trees. The afternoon sun appears between clouds, laying a pale golden band across the snow for a few minutes. One south-facing surface feels almost pleasant against your hand. Nearby shaded ground remains sharply cold. This small contrast reveals another opportunity. Sun exposure can warm exterior materials during daylight. especially where darker surfaces absorb radiation. Thick materials may then release some stored warmth after sunlight disappears. This effect becomes particularly interesting when you later visit earthen architecture in the southwest. For now, you simply notice the sun. People who spend their lives outdoors notice it carefully. They know where it appears in winter and where shadows remain longest. They understand seasonal changes not as abstract astronomical diagrams, but as daily experiences. The environment becomes a calendar. Animal behavior offers information too. Certain protected valleys may attract wildlife during difficult weather. Frozen waterways influence movement, while forests provide both hunting opportunities and obstacles. Winter settlement choices therefore connect shelter to food. You cannot separate architecture from subsistence. A wonderfully warm house becomes less useful if everyone must travel unreasonable distances for water, fuel, or food. That sounds obvious. History is full of obvious things that become invisible once we focus only on buildings. You pause beside a frozen stream. Beneath translucent ice, dark water moves slowly. The air smells clean and faintly woody. With smoke drifting from somewhere behind you, your fingers feel the rough surface of bark when you steady yourself against a tree. Everything around you is a resource or a warning. Water, wood, wind, sun, soil, snow. Each one shapes the winter home before construction begins. There is also a social landscape. Families may need to remain near relatives, allies, stored food, fields, hunting territories, ceremonial spaces, or established travel routes. Warmth is partly communal, and isolation can create risks beyond temperature. A protected settlement allows people to share labor. Someone gathers fuel, someone repairs coverings, someone watches children, someone prepares food while others work outside. During dangerous weather, neighbors can help one another. Architecture cannot be separated from community any more than it can be separated from climate. You turn toward the settlement again as evening approaches. Smoke rises gently rather than racing sideways. That tells you something. The houses sit where the landscape softens the wind, and surrounding terrain has already performed part of their defensive work. No wall has generated heat yet. No blanket has been wrapped around your shoulders. No hearth has been fed. Still, you're warmer than you were on the exposed ridge. That is the quiet intelligence of site selection. You do not command winter to leave. You choose where winter reaches you least effectively. Then you build upon that advantage. Ahead, the outlines of dwellings appear beneath gathering darkness. Some seem surprisingly modest in size, especially when compared with the enormous heated houses familiar today. That smallness is not necessarily a limitation. It can be another form of protection, because once you have found the right ground, the next question becomes wonderfully practical. How much cold air do you really want to heat? You follow the smoke toward the dwellings as evening settles across the snowy landscape. From outside, some shelters seem smaller than you expected. That impression matters. When surviving a severe winter depends upon limited fuel, human warmth, insulation, and careful construction. Unnecessary interior space can become an expensive luxury. Every additional pocket of cold air demands attention. You duck slightly as you approach a low entrance. Behind you, the wind continues pushing dry snow across the ground. But its voice weakens near the shelter. Then you step inside. The difference arrives immediately. The interior is not hot, and nobody would mistake it for a modern heated room. Yet the painful edge of the outdoor cold has disappeared. Your cheeks begin relaxing. Your fingers still feel chilled, but the air around them remains calmer. A small fire produces a steady glow rather than the enormous blaze you might have imagined. Several people occupy the same protected space. Their bodies matter more than they appear to. A resting adult continuously releases heat through normal metabolism. Cooking adds more warmth, while the hearth contributes both radiant heat and warmed air. Inside a compact dwelling, those modest sources accumulate. Inside an enormous structure, much more energy disappears into unused space. The basic physics is straightforward. Warm air rises if a shelter has a very high ceiling. Much of that warmed air gathers above the people who actually need it. A lower or carefully shaped interior keeps useful warmth closer to occupied areas. Compact construction also reduces exposed surface area. Walls and roofs constantly exchange heat with the colder environment outside. The larger those exposed surfaces become, the more opportunities exist for warmth to escape. This does not mean every indigenous winter dwelling was tiny. Some longhouses were substantial structures containing several related families. Earth lodges could also provide generous interior areas for sleeping, storage, cooking, work, and social activity. The important point is efficiency rather than miniature size. Space tends to have a purpose. You're unlikely to find enormous empty entrance halls waiting politely for someone to heat them. That would be rather luxurious. Winter rarely rewards architectural vanity. Instead, you see sleeping areas, storage spaces, working zones, hearths, structural posts, and places where families gather. The arrangement reflects daily life. It also affects temperature. People naturally cluster around useful sources of warmth, especially during the coldest hours. Activities that generate heat, such as cooking, happen within occupied spaces rather than isolated rooms. Even conversation contributes a tiny amount. You can almost imagine winter engineering occurring without anyone calling it engineering. The fire crackles softly. A piece of wood shifts inward, releasing a brief spray of glowing sparks before settling into the coals. You smell smoke, cooked food, dry vegetation, wood, and the earthy scent of material surrounding the shelter. Beneath your hand, a covering feels rough but dry. Dryness is crucial. Insulation works partly by trapping still air within and between materials. When materials become soaked, water replaces some of that trapped air and changes how heat moves through them. Keeping bedding and clothing reasonably dry therefore becomes another quiet winter priority. A compact shelter makes managing those conditions easier. There is less interior volume to monitor. Drafts become easier to notice. A damaged covering can be repaired before a small opening turns into a relentless stream of freezing air. Someone sitting near the wall would feel that problem quickly, and perhaps complain quickly too. Some historical descriptions suggest that indigenous dwellings could appear smoky or uncomfortable to visiting Europeans unfamiliar with their arrangements. That does not necessarily mean the structures were badly designed. Fire, ventilation, weather, fuel, and occupancy created complicated interior conditions that change throughout the day. Smoke control was an ongoing negotiation. Open the ventilation too much and valuable warmth escapes. Close everything too tightly, and smoke accumulates dangerously. The shelter must breathe. That requirement places practical limits on how completely any winter dwelling can be sealed. You cannot simply wrap the entire structure like a parcel and hope everyone enjoys the evening. A fire consumes oxygen. Smoke needs somewhere to go. Moisture from breathing and cooking must also escape. The art lies in allowing enough airflow without permitting uncontrolled drafts. Traditional structures often used openings positioned above fires or incorporated adjustable features that helped manage these competing needs. Their effectiveness varied with weather and design. Wind direction could change everything. A ventilation opening working beautifully one evening might behave differently when a storm arrives from another direction. People adapted. They adjusted coverings, openings, fires, and sleeping positions according to conditions. The house was not a static machine. It was actively managed. This is a detail easily lost when you see a reconstructed dwelling sitting silently inside a museum. A historical winter home was alive with maintenance. Someone was always noticing something. A fire needed fuel. A draft appeared. Bedding required drying. Snow accumulated near an entrance. Food simmered too quickly. Children wandered toward the warmest spot, displaying a timeless human talent for occupying exactly where someone else intended to sit. The dwelling worked because people worked with it. A curious feature of many traditional homes was the way social organization and thermal efficiency could reinforce each other. Shared living meant shared heat. Extended families occupying one structure could generate considerably more body warmth than a single person living alone. Cooking for several people also concentrated heat-producing activities. At night, sleeping arrangements brought people beneath insulating coverings and into protected areas. Privacy existed differently across cultures and periods, but modern expectations of separate heated bedrooms would have seemed energetically extravagant in many historical settings. Your personal space might be smaller, your chances of staying warm could be better. There is a sleepy logic to it. Humans themselves become little furnaces. Historians still disagree about the exact winter temperatures maintained inside many traditional indigenous structures, because reliable measurements obviously do not survive from earlier centuries. Written observers rarely carried standardized instruments into every home they described, even when temperature records exist from later periods. Reconstructed conditions may differ from historical ones. Fuel type matters, occupancy matters, wind matters, construction quality matters, how recently a fire was tended matters. A single number would therefore tell only part of the story. What matters more is the thermal gradient. Outside air might be dangerously cold. Inside air could remain cold by modern standards while still offering dramatic protection from wind and exposure. Near the fire, radiant warmth could make conditions more comfortable. Inside bedding, temperatures could become warmer still. Instead of one uniform indoor climate, you have several nested climates. The landscape is the first. The dwelling creates another. Your clothing creates another. Your bedding creates the smallest one. This layered approach is extraordinarily efficient. You do not need to heat the entire environment to protect the human body. You only need to slow the body's heat loss enough. The idea becomes obvious once you feel it. Move several steps away from the hearth, and your face cools. Return closer, and radiant heat touches your cheeks again. Pull a hide or blanket around your shoulders, and another pocket of warm air forms immediately. The room has barely changed. Your personal environment has. This explains a quirky misunderstanding that can occur when modern people imagine historical winter comfort. We often ask how warm the house was. The better question may be how warm the person was. Those are not the same thing. A person wearing suitable insulating clothing beside a modest fire can remain reasonably comfortable in air that feels unpleasant to someone wearing modern indoor clothing. Heavy coverings at night extend that principle. Sleeping spaces need not resemble tropical rooms when bedding traps body heat effectively. You hear the wind strengthen outside. The shelter responds with faint creaks. Nothing dramatic happens. People continue their evening activities. The storm seems more distant now because moving air cannot sweep directly across your skin. That alone changes your experience enormously. Wind removes the thin layer of warmed air surrounding exposed skin. Block the wind, and your body retains that protective boundary more effectively. Walls therefore accomplish something valuable even before they provide strong insulation. They create stillness. Still air is your friend. Moving air is greedy. It keeps stealing warmth and carrying it elsewhere. Compact interiors make that stillness easier to maintain, provided ventilation remains controlled. Now look upward. The roof shape directs smoke and influences interior air movement. Structural members occupy space that modern builders might hide behind finished surfaces. Everything feels close. That closeness creates intimacy. It also reduces the amount of useless air above you. In some dwellings, central hearths allow people to arrange themselves around a shared source of warmth. Radiant heat travels directly from flames and glowing coals toward nearby bodies and surfaces. This matters because radiant heat can warm you even when surrounding air remains relatively cool. Hold your hands near a fire and you understand immediately. You do not need a lecture. Your palms already know. Cooking stones, vessels, floor materials, and surrounding structural surfaces can also absorb some warmth before releasing it gradually. The effect varies greatly between dwelling types and materials, but thermal mass becomes especially important in earth-based construction. That secret is waiting for you just beyond tonight's firelight. For now, you settle closer to the hearth. The sound of the storm becomes steady enough to feel almost soothing. Smoke rises slowly toward the opening overhead while shadows move across the walls. You notice how little energy is wasted. People occupy the warmest useful areas. Clothing remains on bodies. Bedding waits nearby. The fire stays controlled. The structure blocks the wind. Warmth is concentrated rather than distributed carelessly. There is no magical barrier keeping freezing temperatures away. There is something more interesting. The house asks winter to pass through obstacle after obstacle before reaching you, and one of the strongest obstacles can be found beneath your feet. Soil appears cold when you touch its frozen surface outside. Pile enough of it around a carefully designed dwelling, however, and its behavior changes. The earth itself begins protecting the people within. You lower your eyes toward the floor and begin noticing how closely this dwelling belongs to the ground. Earth seems like an unlikely source of winter protection. Outside, the upper soil can freeze solid enough to resist digging, and exposed ground feels brutally cold beneath your boots. Yet deeper soil behaves differently from the restless atmosphere above it. Air temperatures can rise and collapse within hours. The earth changes more slowly. That difference becomes one of the oldest and most dependable tools available to winter builders. You leave the compact shelter behind and imagine travelling farther across the continent, toward communities where earth becomes an obvious part of architecture. From a distance, some earth-covered homes almost blend into the landscape. Their roofs rise low and broad from the surrounding ground. Snow settles across them. Smoke emerging from above may provide the clearest sign that families are living beneath those quiet surfaces. Step closer, and the scale becomes clearer. These are not crude holes scratched into frozen soil. Among peoples such as the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara of the northern plains, substantial earth lodges were sophisticated structures supported by heavy timber frameworks. Construction demanded knowledge and serious labour. Large wooden posts carried horizontal beams and roof supports. Smaller timbers filled spaces between major structural elements. Over this framework came layers of branches, grass, vegetation, and packed earth. The result could become remarkably massive. That mass mattered. When winter wind strikes a thin exposed surface, heat passes through relatively quickly unless the material provides strong insulation. A thick earth-covered wall or roof behaves differently. The surrounding soil slows rapid temperature changes while additional plant materials can trap insulating air. You are creating resistance through thickness. The shelter does not become warm by itself. Instead, it loses warmth more slowly. That distinction keeps returning. Winter survival is often less about producing extraordinary amounts of heat and more about preventing ordinary heat from disappearing. Imagine placing your hand against an interior surface. It feels cool, but it does not carry the vicious bite of a thin object exposed directly to the outside air. Somewhere beyond your palm lie vegetation, structural materials, and a substantial layer of soil. Beyond that waits the snow. Then comes the wind. Winter has several barriers to cross before reaching you. The earth also provides thermal mass. This means it can absorb heat and release it gradually rather than changing temperature instantly with the surrounding air. During periods of indoor heating, nearby materials may warm somewhat. When the fire declines, stored warmth can help moderate how quickly conditions deteriorate. Do not imagine the walls glowing like giant radiators. The effect is gentler. Think of temperature swings being softened outside. A clear winter evening can become dramatically colder after sunset, inside a well-built earth-covered dwelling. The transition can occur more slowly. Slow change is valuable. It gives people time. It reduces the sudden demands placed upon the fire. It allows sleeping bodies, clothing, bedding, and shared warmth to function within a more stable environment. The central hearth flickers before you. Smoke rises through the roof, opening while firelight catches heavy wooden posts. The air carries the scent of burning wood mixed with earth, dried vegetation, food, and hides. Your ears pick up small domestic sounds. A vessel shifts near the fire. Someone moves across the floor. Timber responds quietly to the changing temperature. Outside, the wind remains almost invisible from here. That is impressive considering the apparent simplicity of the materials. Earth is everywhere. Grass is ordinary. Wood is familiar. Arrange them intelligently, however, and ordinary materials become environmental technology. There is even something slightly amusing about the arrangement. Modern houses often spend enormous effort keeping dirt outside. Here, dirt is helping save your life. Of course, earth-covered architecture brings complications. Earth is heavy, very heavy. A roof carrying substantial soil requires a strong supporting framework, especially when winter adds snow above it. Timbers must be selected and positioned carefully. Damage from moisture can weaken organic materials. Drainage matters enormously if water penetrates repeatedly. Comfortable insulation can become damp and structural problems may follow. Maintenance is unavoidable. Families therefore repair these homes. Earth coverings may require renewed attention after weathering. Roof areas can need additional material, while internal timbers must remain dependable. A house is not finished forever on the day it is built. It continues demanding labour. That labour becomes part of seasonal life. You can imagine warmer months providing opportunities for repairs before another difficult winter arrives. Leaks that seem mildly irritating during summer become much less charming when freezing weather returns. Preparation matters. One curious detail about earth lodges is that they could function differently across seasons. The same thermal mass that helps resist winter cold can also moderate summer heat. When hot air outside changes rapidly, thick earth slows that heat from reaching the interior. The building therefore buffers extremes in both directions. It does not know whether you prefer January or July. It simply resists rapid change. This principle appears in earth architecture around the world because the physics is so useful. Yet each indigenous tradition developed within its own cultural and environmental context. You should resist imagining a single invention spreading unchanged across every region. Native North America contained tremendous architectural variety. Even structures placed within the broad category of earth lodges differed according to community, location, period, available materials, and household needs. Archaeologists reconstruct these differences from surviving structural traces, historical descriptions, indigenous knowledge, and later examples. Uncertainty remains. Scholars still debate how particular roof layers were arranged in some earlier structures and how frequently designs changed across generations. Organic materials decay, grass disappears, bark deteriorates, wood rots or burns, earth collapses and becomes difficult to distinguish from surrounding soil after centuries. Archaeologists may find post holes and floor patterns without recovering every layer that once protected the inhabitants. A vanished bundle of grass can represent a missing piece of thermal engineering that makes reconstruction both fascinating and frustrating. You can identify where a post stood. Knowing exactly how a family sealed a troublesome winter draft is harder. Historical accounts provide clues, but outside observers did not always understand what deserved careful description. A visitor might marvel at the size of a lodge while ignoring the bedding that made winter nights tolerable. Another might describe the central fire but fail to explain how ventilation changed during storms. Daily knowledge often looks too ordinary to record. That is one of history's little tricks. The most important habits can become invisible because everyone practicing them considers them obvious. You return your attention to the floor. Some earth-based structures use the ground itself as part of their thermal strategy, while other indigenous dwellings were partly excavated below the surrounding surface. A sunken floor gains protection from direct wind exposure and places occupied space closer to temperatures moderated by the soil. Again, depth matters. Near the surface, ground temperature responds strongly to seasonal weather. Farther down, fluctuations become smaller. Builders do not need modern temperature probes to notice practical benefits. Generations living in a place provide their own long experiment. People remember which structures stay comfortable. They remember which walls sweat with moisture. They notice where frost forms. They observe how long fires must burn. They learn. Knowledge accumulates slowly, then hides inside tradition. A child watching adults repair an earth covering may simply think this is how roofs are maintained, yet the action contains lessons about drainage, insulation, structural strength, and climate. No technical vocabulary is required. The roof either works or it does not. Winter grades the examination. You move nearer the central fire. Radiant warmth reaches your face while the massive structure around you limits the speed at which that warmth escapes. Several people share the interior. Their clothing traps heat near their bodies, and sleeping materials wait along protected areas. Stored food occupies another portion of the dwelling. The home is not merely a shell. It is part bedroom, kitchen, workshop, storage space, gathering place, and winter refuge. That multifunctional arrangement can improve efficiency. Cooking produces heat where people already gather. People produce heat where they sleep. Firelight serves the same area that receives fire warmth. Nothing requires a separate heated kitchen several rooms away. Your 21st century desire for a private hallway would be terribly inconvenient here. The structure encourages concentration, and concentration conserves warmth. Now consider the roof above you during a snowstorm. Snow gathers across the earth covering, adding another layer between interior and atmosphere, because snow contains considerable trapped air. An undisturbed layer can provide additional insulation, but there is a limit. Accumulation also adds dangerous weight. Wet snow can become especially heavy. Strong timber supports therefore remain essential. People must observe the structure and conditions rather than assuming more snow is always beneficial. Winter offers gifts with conditions attached. The same snow that insulates can collapse something poorly supported. The same fire that warms can fill a badly ventilated room with smoke. The same earth that buffers temperature can become troublesome when saturated with water. Successful shelter depends upon balance. You begin hearing the weather differently. The wind above the roof sounds distant and softened. Snow scratches faintly across the outer surface before settling somewhere beyond your sight. Inside, flames sink lower. Nobody panics. The thick surrounding materials do not surrender their stored conditions immediately. Someone adds fuel calmly. The fire brightens again. That calmness may be the most revealing detail. A thin, drafty shelter can demand constant reaction because conditions change rapidly. Massive construction provides a larger margin between comfortable cold and dangerous cold. It buys stability, and stability buys sleep. Eventually, conversation becomes quieter. People settle into familiar places while the central glow paints the timbers in warm amber light. You pull an insulating covering around yourself and feel the difference between exposed air and trapped warmth. The earth surrounding the lodge remains silent. It produces no flame. It consumes no fuel. It requires no tending during the darkest hours. It simply slows the cold. That passive protection is extraordinarily valuable when every piece of firewood represents human labor. Yet Earth cannot travel easily. A massive lodge belongs to its location. Other communities require homes that can move across the landscape while still resisting dangerous winter weather. For them, insulation must become lighter. The walls must be portable. And on the open plains, one remarkably useful material can provide both flexibility and protection. Outside, large grazing animals move through the winter landscape beneath thick natural coats. Their hides will become another answer to the cold. You leave the heavy earth lodge behind and travel westward in your imagination, where the winter landscape opens beneath an enormous sky. Trees become less dependable here, the horizon stretches farther, and the wind seems to gather strength because almost nothing interrupts its journey across the plains. Dry snow races over frozen grass. You hear it whispering around your feet while distant shapes move slowly through the pale landscape. They are bison. For many plains peoples, bison provided far more than food. Their bodies supplied materials that could become clothing, containers, tools, bedding, coverings, and important components of shelter. A carefully prepared hide represented valuable stored labor. In winter, that value became especially clear. You approach a hide-covered dwelling while the wind pulls steadily at its outer surface. The structure looks vulnerable from a distance. Compared with an earth lodge, its walls appear impossibly thin. There are no massive banks of soil. There is no heavy roof resting on enormous supporting posts. Yet the shelter solves a different problem. It can move. For communities whose seasonal lives involved mobility, a house weighing many tons would be wonderfully warm and spectacularly inconvenient. Portable architecture requires compromise. Materials must remain light enough to transport while still providing meaningful protection from wind, precipitation, and cold. Hide performs several useful roles. Properly prepared animal skins can create durable coverings that resist wind far better than an open campsite. They can also be arranged in layers with other materials to improve interior conditions. The most important achievement is immediate. The moving air stops reaching you directly. You step through the entrance, and the relentless wind suddenly becomes a muffled sound outside. Your skin notices before your mind does. The air remains cold, but it is still. That stillness allows the thin layer of warmed air near your body and clothing to survive longer. Wind can strip that warmth away rapidly outdoors. Inside, your clothing performs much better because the shelter has removed one of its greatest enemies. The smell here differs from the earth lodge. You notice smoke, leather, dry grass, food, and the faint scent of worked hides. A small fire burns near the center. Above it, smoke rises toward an opening that can be adjusted according to wind conditions. The flames are controlled. Nobody's attempting to recreate midsummer. That would consume fuel quickly. Instead, warmth concentrates around people, clothing, bedding, and occupied space. This is where hide becomes part of a larger thermal system. The outer covering blocks much of the wind. An interior liner can help control airflow and create an additional barrier. Insulating materials beneath sleeping bodies reduce heat loss into frozen ground. Heavy robes and clothing trap warmth near the skin. The fire supplies radiant heat. Each element does a modest job. Together, they become surprisingly effective. Historically, tipis were particularly associated with plains cultures, although their designs, dimensions, coverings, and patterns varied among peoples and through time. Before horses became widespread on the plains, portable structures were generally constrained by transportation methods available to communities. Later, horses allowed larger loads to move more efficiently. That influenced the possible size of some portable dwellings. Architecture responds not only to climate, it responds to transportation technology too. You can almost hear history becoming practical. A larger shelter may offer more living space, but larger coverings require more material, longer poles, greater transport capacity, and additional labor during setup. Everything has a cost. Bison hides themselves were valuable and labor-intensive. Preparing them involved considerable skill. The exact process varied according to the intended use and community tradition, but removing unwanted tissue, stretching, scraping, drying, softening, and sometimes smoking could require sustained work. A shelter covering therefore represented far more than a convenient piece of animal skin. It contained hours of human effort, often many hours. This gives winter maintenance another dimension. A damaged covering cannot simply be treated as disposable. It may be repaired carefully. Seams matter. Small gaps matter. A tier positioned badly during a storm can invite moving air into the interior. And moving air is remarkably talented at finding weaknesses. Cold wind has no manners. It enters wherever you allow it. One quirky detail about hide shelters is that snow gathering near the lower exterior can sometimes help reduce drafts. A modest accumulation may block wind from slipping beneath the covering, but deliberately relying upon deep snow would be foolish because entrances, ventilation, structural loads, and moisture still require attention. Once again, winter refuses to provide simple rules. Snow can help and hinder simultaneously. The same is true of tightly sealing a shelter. Your instinct might tell you to close every opening. That seems logical. It can also become dangerous when a fire is burning inside. Combustion requires oxygen, while smoke and other gases must escape. Ventilation therefore remains essential. A well-managed winter shelter does not eliminate airflow. It controls airflow. That difference is fundamental. The upper smoke opening and lower air movement can interact to create a useful circulation pattern. Cooler air enters lower portions. The fire warms nearby air. Warmer air rises and helps carry smoke upward. An inner liner can influence this movement while also reducing uncomfortable drafts near occupants. You do not need to understand fluid dynamics mathematically. Watch the smoke. If it rises properly, conditions are favorable. If it begins wandering into everyone's faces, something needs adjustment. This probably produces a very ancient form of household criticism. Someone always notices first. Wind direction makes the problem more interesting. Adjustable smoke flaps can help respond to changing conditions. Although exact arrangements differ between tipi traditions, the structure must work with the wind rather than pretending wind does not exist. Their flexibility is part of its intelligence. A rigid opening cannot react, an adjustable one can. You sit closer to the fire and notice how the hide surface above seems almost alive. It moves slightly with gusts. The poles remain firm while the covering responds gently. Outside, the planes are exposed and severe. Inside, the shelter bends rather than fighting every movement. Portability and flexibility become strengths. Historians and cultural specialists still discuss how particular winter configurations differed among plains nations and across historical periods. Early written descriptions are incomplete, and later photographs sometimes show communities after major disruptions to traditional life. Museum reconstructions can help, but they may freeze one version of a dwelling into a supposedly universal model. Real households adapted. A winter configuration might differ from a summer arrangement. Available hides could change. Family size changed. Transportation resources changed. Trade introduced new materials. Later canvas coverings altered some practices significantly. There was never one timeless tipi existing unchanged for centuries. History is messier than that, and more interesting. You can see adaptation happening even within a single winter evening. Someone adjusts the entrance. Another person shifts bedding away from a draft. Fuel is added to the fire. A robe is pulled tighter around a child's shoulders. The shelter itself is only one layer of protection. Behavior completes the architecture. This is particularly important during sleep. When the fire becomes smaller, heavy robes and bedding become responsible for retaining more personal warmth. Several layers beneath a sleeper can be just as important as those above. Frozen ground acts like a vast heat sink. Your warm body continuously loses energy to anything colder that touches it. Lie directly on frozen earth, and conduction begins carrying warmth downward. Place dry grasses, mats, hides, or other insulating material between your body and the ground, and that process slows. The difference can feel enormous. Your hand demonstrates it easily. Press your palm against cold bare ground for several seconds. Then place it against a thick, dry hide. One surface seems to pull warmth from you immediately. The other slows that exchange. A humble barrier may matter more than making the fire slightly larger. You begin understanding why judging a shelter only by wall thickness can be misleading. The entire interior system matters. What lies beneath you? What covers you? Where does the wind enter? How is smoke removed? Where are people positioned? How much fuel is available? A thin wall can function surprisingly well when every other part of the system supports it. Still, conditions could become harsh. Portable hide dwellings were not magical bubbles of warmth. During extreme weather, interiors could remain very cold, particularly away from the fire. People depended heavily upon suitable clothing, bedding, food, activity, and careful fire management. The phrase "never froze" should therefore remain where it belongs, in the realm of dramatic exaggeration. Reality is more impressive. People could survive severe environments without expecting the house itself to do everything. The dwelling protected clothing from wind. Clothing protected the body. Bedding protected the sleeper. Food supplied metabolic energy. Fire added warmth. Knowledge connected the pieces. You hear a gust strike harder. The covering pulls briefly against its supports, then relaxes. A few snow crystals slip near the entrance before someone makes a small adjustment. Inside, nobody appears surprised. This weather has been anticipated. That may be the deepest winter advantage of all. Preparation begins before the storm. Hides must already be prepared. Poles must already be available. Fuel must be gathered. Food must be stored or obtainable. Clothing must be maintained. A shelter erected after everyone becomes dangerously cold arrives far too late. Winter rewards foresight. The fire settles into glowing coals. You hold your hands toward them and feel radiant warmth spreading through your fingers. Behind you, the hide wall remains cool. Between the two exists a pocket of protected life. It is fragile compared with modern infrastructure, yet remarkably capable when understood and managed properly. Outside waits an enormous frozen plain. Inside, someone quietly tends the coals. You begin to appreciate why portable hide architecture became so successful in environments where mobility mattered. But the outer hide is only the beginning. The shape of the dwelling, its liner, its smoke opening, and even the position of the entrance can transform how air behaves inside. To understand why this apparently simple structure handles winter so effectively, you need to remain here a little longer. The next secret is hidden in the way the tipi breathes. You remain inside as darkness settles completely over the plains, and the teepee begins revealing details that daylight made easy to overlook. The fire has grown smaller now. Its orange light travels upward along the poles, creating long shadows that converge somewhere above your head. Smoke rises steadily through the opening while occasional gusts make the outer covering tremble. Nothing about the structure is accidental. Its shape matters as much as its materials. From outside, a tipi appears broadly conical, although traditional designs are often slightly asymmetrical rather than perfectly symmetrical cones. That shape performs several useful jobs. Strong winds can move around the sloping exterior instead of striking a broad vertical wall directly. Rain and melting snow can also travel downward along the covering rather than collecting on a flat roof. Most importantly tonight, the interior shape helps manage fire and air. You watch smoke rise. Warm air produced near the hearth becomes less dense than the colder surrounding air, so it naturally moves upward. The narrowing upper space guides that movement toward the smoke opening. As warm air leaves, cooler air enters lower portions of the shelter. The process creates circulation. That sounds simple. Managing it comfortably requires skill. Too much uncontrolled incoming air creates drafts around the people sitting near the floor. Too little ventilation allows smoke to linger and makes the interior unpleasant or dangerous. This is where an inner liner becomes particularly valuable. In many historical tipi traditions, a liner could hang around the lower interior walls rather than extending all the way to the top. A gap remains between liner and outer covering. Cool air entering near the bottom can move within that space before rising toward the fire and upper opening. The arrangement helps reduce direct drafts across occupied areas. At the same time, the liner creates another layer between people and the cold outer covering. Trapped air contributes additional insulation. The principle resembles layered winter clothing. One layer stops much of the wind. Another creates a protected pocket of air. Your own body provides warmth inside that pocket. A dwelling can do something similar on a larger scale. You reach toward the liner. Its surface feels cool but not brutally cold. Beyond it lies an air gap, then the outer covering, then the plain's night. The wind must influence several layers before reaching your skin. That is a remarkable amount of work performed by something that can eventually be dismantled and transported. Portability has not eliminated thermal planning. It has forced thermal planning to become lighter. The entrance provides another example. Historical tipi entrances could be oriented and managed according to community practices and environmental considerations. Modern descriptions sometimes simplify this into rigid universal rules about direction, but traditions varied. Wind conditions also mattered. A doorway directly exposed to relentless winter gusts can become a funnel for cold air. Positioning and covering the entrance carefully reduces that problem. Even opening it briefly affects conditions. Someone enters. Cold air slips along the floor. The covering falls closed again. A moment later, the disturbance begins fading. You feel it around your ankles first. Cold air tends to remain low because it is denser than warmer air. This means the lower portion of any fire-heated shelter requires particular attention. People sit and sleep close to the ground, precisely where incoming cold air naturally collects. The liner helps. Bedding helps more. Raised or deeply insulated sleeping surfaces provide another advantage. Suddenly, those layers of grass and hide beneath you seem much less decorative. They are separating your body from the coldest zone. The central fire creates a different kind of warmth. Radiant energy travels directly outward from the flames and glowing coals. You feel it immediately against your face and hands, even though the air farther away remains cool. That is why people can feel comfortable near a fire without heating every cubic foot of interior air. The strategy is wonderfully targeted. Warm the person, not the empty ceiling. Your imaginary energy bill approves. Fuel availability certainly does. On open grasslands, dependable firewood could become a significant concern depending upon location and season. Communities camped near river valleys or wooded areas could gain better access to timber. Where wood was limited, other fuels might sometimes be used. Dried bison dung, for example, could serve as fuel on the plains. It sounds unromantic. It also burns. Historical survival rarely cares whether a solution looks elegant in a painting. Dry animal dung could be collected where other combustible material was scarce, turning an abundant landscape resource into useful heat. Its use provides one of those wonderfully practical historical details that modern storytelling often overlooks. A heroic winter scene becomes slightly less glamorous when someone announces that the fire needs another dried bison chip. Yet that is exactly why the detail matters. Daily survival is built from ordinary solutions. You listen to the fire crackling softly. The smell of smoke remains noticeable, but proper airflow carries much of it upward. Occasionally, a change in wind sends smoke wandering differently. That is when the upper smoke flaps become important. Poles connected to those flaps allow their position to be adjusted from below. Changing their angle can influence how wind moves across the smoke opening and how effectively smoke escapes. This requires observation. The shelter is constantly communicating. Smoke drifting downward tells you something. A fluttering covering tells you something. Cold air entering from one side tells you something else. Experienced occupants respond before small problems become miserable ones. Researchers still disagree about how closely modern reconstructed tipi ventilation reproduces every historical configuration used by different plains peoples. Much knowledge survives through indigenous traditions, historical descriptions, artwork, photographs, and physical examples from later periods. Earlier arrangements are sometimes harder to document precisely. Materials changed over time. Bison hide coverings became less available following the catastrophic destruction of bison herds during the 19th century. Canvas increasingly replaced hide in many settings. Transportation changed too. Household practices adapted alongside those changes. So when you picture this winter interior, remember that you are looking at a broad principle rather than one frozen moment shared identically by every plains nation. The principle is controlled airflow. That control becomes especially interesting during storms. Imagine snow arriving horizontally outside. Wind pushes hard against the covering while temperatures continue falling. Your instinct might be to seal every opening completely, but the central fire still needs oxygen. Smoke still needs escape. People continue breathing moisture into the interior. Cooking adds additional water vapor. A completely sealed shelter would quickly create new problems. Condensation can form when warm, moist interior air reaches cold surfaces. That moisture may dampen materials, and dampness is a winter enemy. Dry insulation traps air efficiently. Wet material generally conducts heat more readily and can become uncomfortable against skin. Ventilation therefore protects warmth partly by allowing moisture to leave. This sounds contradictory. You deliberately allow some warm air to escape so that the remaining shelter can function better. Winter architecture is full of such compromises. More fire is not always better. More ceiling is not always better. More snow is not always worse. The successful system lives somewhere between extremes. You settle farther into your bedding. Underneath are layers separating you from frozen soil. Around your shoulders sits another insulating layer. The fire remains several feet away, yet you still feel comfortable enough to rest. That tells you something important. The tipi itself does not need to become uniformly warm. Near the ground at the outer edge, temperatures may remain quite low. Near the fire, radiant warmth changes your experience dramatically. Inside your bedding, your own metabolism creates an even warmer microclimate. Once again, you're living inside nested zones. This helps explain why modern experiments measuring only the central air temperature can miss part of the historical experience. A thermometer hanging somewhere inside tells you about the air. It does not tell you how warm someone feels beneath several insulating robes near a glowing fire, nor does it reveal how cold their fingers become when they leave the shelter before dawn. Both experiences can be true. Traditional winter living included warmth and hardship side by side. The fire may need attention during the night. Someone may wake and add fuel. A storm may require adjustments. Children may shift beneath coverings. Snow may gather around the base. Sleep does not always continue uninterrupted. Still, compare this with remaining outside. There, wind immediately attacks every exposed surface. Snow enters clothing. Your bedding would rest directly beneath open sky. Any fire would lose heat rapidly to the surrounding atmosphere. Inside the teepee, even modest warmth becomes concentrated. The improvement can mean the difference between discomfort and danger. Another subtle advantage comes from speed. A portable shelter can be erected relatively quickly by experienced people. That matters when weather changes or a community relocates. A massive permanent building provides greater thermal mass, but it cannot follow seasonal movement. The tipi trades mass for mobility. Its clever airflow and layered interior help compensate. Every architecture reveals priorities. You can almost read a society's relationship with its environment by examining what its buildings are designed to do. Here, the dwelling says movement matters, wind matters, fire matters, transport matters, family matters, and adaptation matters constantly. The flames shrink again. Now the brightest light comes from a bed of red coals. Outside, the wind has become lower and steadier, producing a deep rushing sound across the plains. You can hear snow brush in the covering. Inside, the air remains calm near your face. A thin ribbon of smoke rises overhead. Your bedding holds the warmth your body has already produced. The structure seems almost to breathe around you, drawing cooler air below and releasing smoke above. There is elegance in that movement. But portability is only one answer to winter. Elsewhere on the plains, communities built homes that could not be folded, bundled, or carried anywhere. They committed timber, grass, soil, labour, and memory to one place. Those houses could shelter entire households beneath enormous earthen roofs. As your imaginary fire fades towards sleep, the landscape shifts again. The light portable walls disappear. Heavy wooden posts rise around you instead, and above them waits a roof thick enough to make winter move very slowly indeed. You wake into another kind of winter shelter, where the light walls of the plains tipi have become something heavier. Massive wooden posts surround you. Above them rests a broad roof carrying layers of branches, grass, and packed earth. The entire structure feels rooted deeply into the landscape, almost as though the ground has risen around a household. Outside, bitter wind crosses the northern plains. Inside, its force seems remarkably distant. You're standing within an earth lodge, associated especially with agricultural peoples of the Missouri River region, among the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara. These structures became central features of substantial villages. Their winter usefulness came from more than thick walls. They combined thermal mass, communal living, controlled fire, stored resources, and carefully organized interior space within one durable structure. Look upward first. Heavy vertical posts form the main structural system, supporting horizontal beams and additional roof timbers. Smaller pieces of wood create a dense framework above them. Layers of willow branches or similar materials could cover this framework, followed by grass and substantial quantities of earth. The exact methods differed between communities and periods, but the overall result could be formidable. You are sitting beneath a roof weighing many tons. That thought is slightly less relaxing. Fortunately, experienced builders understood how to distribute that weight across a strong timber framework. Construction required cooperation, knowledge, and access to suitable trees. These homes were serious architectural investments. Historical accounts also indicate that women held important responsibilities for constructing and maintaining earth lodges among several Missouri River peoples. That detail challenges an old stereotype that large historical structures must have been designed and built primarily by men. Knowledge of house construction could belong strongly within women's spheres of expertise. A builder needed to understand materials intimately. She needed to know which timbers would support weight, how coverings should overlap, and how earth behaved after rain or snow. Practical architecture was social knowledge. It passed through generations. You walk slowly around the interior. The central hearth draws your attention immediately. Its fire is not enormous. It does not need to be. The thick surrounding structure prevents heat from disappearing as quickly as it would inside an exposed, poorly insulated shelter. Radiant warmth reaches nearby occupants. Warm air rises toward the roof before smoke escapes through an opening overhead. The smell is unmistakably domestic. Burning wood mingles with dried vegetation. Stored food, hides, earth, and the faint smoke absorbed by timbers through years of use. Your fingertips brush a wooden support. It feels dry and slightly polished. People have moved around this post thousands of times. Children may have leaned against it. Hands may have touched it while carrying food, repairing equipment, or arranging sleeping spaces. The lodge is architecture shaped by ordinary life. Sleeping areas can occupy portions around the outer interior. Raised platforms or beds, along with robes, hides, mats, and other insulating materials, help separate sleepers from cold surfaces. That separation becomes especially important after the central fire declines. Remember the lesson from the teepee. The room itself does not need to remain uniformly warm if the human body is protected within smaller insulating layers. Earth lodges simply begin with a stronger outer barrier. The thick roof and walls reduce rapid heat exchange. Then clothing and bedding complete the job. You might think of the lodge as the largest blanket. Everything inside becomes another layer. There is another source of warmth sitting quietly around you. People, a large earth lodge could accommodate an extended household, although occupancy varied according to community and circumstance. Every person contributes metabolic heat. Cooking adds more. A fire adds still more. Dogs sharing interior spaces could contribute their own small amount, while perhaps contributing opinions about sleeping arrangements as well. Warmth accumulates through ordinary presence. This becomes increasingly important during long periods of severe weather. If everyone occupies one protected structure, you're not heating several separate buildings unnecessarily. Labour concentrates too. One hearth can support several people. One maintained roof protects an extended household. Fuel gathering benefits everyone inside. The arrangement is both social and practical. Now listen beyond the walls. Almost nothing. A gust passes overhead, but the thick structure turns its sharp voice into a muted rumble. Wind cannot easily push through packed earth. Drafts remain possible around entrances, roof openings, or damaged areas. Yet the main shell offers substantial resistance. The entrance itself deserves attention. Some earth lodges incorporated projecting entrance passages that created distance between occupied interior space and exposed outdoors. Such an arrangement can reduce direct wind penetration when someone enters during a storm. Outside air does not necessarily sweep straight across the entire room. Again, architecture slows winter rather than eliminating it. The cold must turn corners. It must cross barriers. It must compete with fire, clothing, bedding, and human warmth. Make winter work for every inch. That could almost be the design philosophy. Food storage strengthens the system in another way. Agricultural peoples along the Missouri River cultivated crops including corn, beans, squash, and sunflowers. Food could be dried and preserved for later use. Storage caches helped households survive seasons when fields produced nothing. Some storage pits were located within or near settlements. Depending upon tradition and period, winter warmth means little without calories. Your body creates heat by metabolizing food. When temperatures fall, maintaining body temperature requires energy. A well-stocked community therefore possesses another form of stored warmth. Corn is potential heat. Dried meat is potential heat. Fat is especially energy-dense. A winter household survives partly by burning fuel in the hearth, and partly by burning food inside human bodies. The two processes are less different than they first appear. Both release stored chemical energy. Nobody inside needs to describe it that way. They simply know that winter hunger is dangerous. A warm meal near the fire restores more than morale. You hear something simmering. Steam carries a rich, earthy smell through the lodge. Hands extend toward bowls. Conversation continues beneath the dark timbers. For a moment, the entire building seems designed around this simple scene. Shelter, stored food, fire, and family converge in one place. There is a quirky feature to such substantial earth architecture. From outside, a lodge can look almost like a rounded hill. Vegetation may eventually grow across portions of an earthen surface. An unfamiliar traveller approaching from the wrong angle could see landscape before recognizing architecture. The home almost disguises itself. That blending is visually striking. But the practical advantage comes from the earth itself. A thick covering has tremendous thermal inertia. When outdoor temperature plunges rapidly after sunset, the entire mass does not instantly match it. Indoor temperatures change more gradually. The fire therefore works against a slower moving opponent. Yet these lodges were not permanently cosy. Moisture could become troublesome. Roof leaks required attention. Earth coverings needed maintenance. And heavy snowfall could increase structural loads. Smoke management remained necessary. Fuel still had to be gathered. Severe cold could still make interior areas uncomfortable. There was no effortless winter paradise beneath the soil. Historians also continue examining how household arrangements, lodge dimensions, and seasonal occupancy change through different periods. European observers documented some villages extensively, but those observations came after indigenous societies had already experienced disease, warfare, trade changes, migration, and expanding colonial pressures. Earlier archaeological evidence fills some gaps while opening others. A lodge floor can reveal hearths and post patterns. It cannot preserve every winter routine. Researchers sometimes disagree about how particular interior features were used, or how consistently later descriptions apply to earlier centuries. Daily life refuses to fossilize neatly. You must reconstruct it from fragments. Still, the thermal logic remains visible. Heavy construction buffers temperature. A central fire concentrates radiant warmth. Communal occupancy adds body heat. Insulated bedding protects sleepers. Stored food fuels metabolism. Protected entrances reduce drafts. Every feature supports another. And maintenance holds everything together. Imagine now that the fire has burned low during the deepest part of night. You wake briefly. The lodge is cooler. Your nose notices before the rest of you does. But beneath thick coverings, your body has created a pocket of warmth. You hear breathing nearby. A faint red glow remains in the hearth. Outside, temperatures may have fallen dramatically since evening. Inside, the massive earthen shell has slowed that change. Someone rises quietly. A piece of fuel settles onto the coals. For several moments, nothing happens. Then a tiny flame appears. It catches another edge, brightens, and begins rebuilding the fire without urgency. That lack of urgency is the advantage. The house has bought time. A poorly protected shelter might require constant aggressive heating during extreme weather. Here, thermal mass allows the hearth to work more gradually. The structure and fire cooperate. Morning eventually arrives as a pale suggestion above the smoke opening. People begin moving. Food is prepared. Tools are handled. Someone checks the condition of the entrance. Daily life resumes while winter remains outside. You can imagine neighbouring lodges awakening as well, each containing its own household beneath a broad earthen roof. Together they form something larger than individual shelters. They form a winter community. Paths connect families. Stored resources support social relationships. Knowledge moves between generations. Help is close when repairs become difficult. The village itself becomes another protective layer. You step toward the entrance and look back. The central hearth glows beneath its roof opening. Heavy posts disappear into shadow. Beds and stored possessions line the surrounding interior. Everything appears enclosed around a shared centre. Yet farther east, another architectural tradition stretches this communal principle into a very different shape. Instead of gathering a household beneath a rounded earthen roof, imagine extending the structure lengthwise through the forest. Several related families live beneath one long covering. Multiple fires glow along a shared interior. Bark replaces heavy earth. The building becomes narrow, elongated, and deeply social. You step into the snowy forest again. Ahead, between tall trees, waits the longhouse. You follow a narrow path beneath tall trees, where fresh snow rests heavily upon branches and softens every sound around you. The open plains have disappeared behind the forest. Here, trunks interrupt the wind from countless directions, while bark, timber, and other plant materials surround you in abundance. Ahead, something long and dark emerges between the trees. At first, it resembles an enormous rounded roof resting close to the earth. Then smoke becomes visible. Several faint streams rise through openings above the structure, bending gently as they reach the cold air. You are approaching a longhouse. Longhouses are especially associated with several indigenous peoples of the northeastern woodlands, including the Haudenosaunee nations. Their political confederacy became so closely connected with this architecture that they described themselves through the image of an extended longhouse. The physical buildings themselves served households containing related families. Their elongated shape created a very different winter environment from the round earth lodge you have just left. You approach an entrance at one end. A covering reduces the direct passage of wind. Beyond it, a short transition brings you into dimness, smoke, and warmth. Your eyes adjust slowly. The building stretches ahead farther than expected. A framework of flexible wooden poles forms the walls and curved roof. Sheets of bark cover the exterior, creating a durable protective shell when properly arranged and maintained. Elm bark was historically important in some regions. Other materials could be used according to availability and tradition. The smell is immediate. Wood smoke hangs in the upper air. You also notice bark, dried foods, woven materials, warm bodies, and the earthy scent of winter clothing slowly drying near the fires. Several hearths glow along the central passage. They divide the long interior into smaller zones of warmth. Families occupy spaces along the sides. Sleeping platforms and storage areas rise above the floor, using vertical space without requiring separate rooms. The arrangement feels busy even during a quiet evening. Someone tends food. Another person repairs an object near the firelight. Children settle beside relatives. Soft conversation passes through the building while flames crackle beneath openings in the roof. The longhouse is communal architecture in its clearest form. Instead of giving each small family a completely separate exterior shell, related households share walls and roof. That arrangement has obvious social meaning. It also carries a thermal advantage. Shared walls are not exposed to winter. If several families occupy separate buildings, each building loses heat through its own exterior surfaces. Place them beneath one larger covering, and much of that dividing surface disappears. You have fewer cold exterior walls relative to the number of people sheltered. Human bodies also contribute heat to the shared interior. Cooking occurs beneath the same roof. Several hearths release radiant warmth into occupied areas. No single fire needs to warm the entire building evenly. Each creates a local zone. You notice this while walking. Move near a hearth and warmth touches your face. Continue farther between fires and the air becomes cooler. The longhouse contains a chain of microclimates. That is perfectly acceptable. Nobody requires every corner to remain at an identical temperature. People arrange activities around useful warmth. Sleeping spaces gain protection from walls, bedding, clothing, and nearby household fires. Once again, historical comfort is targeted rather than uniform. The bark covering plays an important role. Bark seems thin compared with packed earth, but properly layered sheets provide meaningful protection against wind and precipitation. The wooden framework supports those sheets while allowing the building to remain relatively lightweight compared with an earth lodge. Additional mats or interior materials could further influence drafts and comfort. The surrounding forest provides another layer of environmental protection. Trees reduce exposure to the uninterrupted winds found across open terrain. This does not make woodland winters gentle. Snow can become deep. Cold can remain severe for long periods. Ice storms burden branches. Moisture becomes persistent. Yet abundant timber and bark create architectural opportunities unavailable in treeless landscapes. The forest supplies the vocabulary of the house, A curious detail is how large some longhouses could become. Their dimensions varied considerably, and structures could sometimes be extended as household needs changed. Imagine adding length to a home because the social group beneath its roof has expanded. The house almost grows with the family. That flexibility reflects the importance of kinship. It also creates a wonderfully literal version of the phrase extended family. Here, the extension may involve actual architecture. You move closer to one hearth. Smoke rises toward a roof opening positioned above it. Ventilation remains essential because several fires inside one structure can produce substantial smoke. Roof vents allow smoke to escape. But airflow is never perfectly obedient. Changes in wind can push smoke sideways or downward. Visitors unfamiliar with longhouses sometimes found interiors very smoky. Historical accounts occasionally emphasize irritated eyes and darkened surfaces. That should not be dismissed. Smoke was a genuine challenge. But opening enormous holes simply to clear the air would sacrifice too much warmth. Occupants therefore balanced ventilation against heat retention. You begin noticing where smoke accumulates most heavily. The upper portion is hazier. Lower occupied areas can remain clearer when airflow functions properly. Smoke also discourages some insects and can help dry or preserve certain materials, though breathing heavy smoke obviously carries health costs. Historical survival solutions often provide benefits and disadvantages at the same time. Nothing here is magical. It is adaptation under constraints. Historians still debate some details of longhouse winter occupancy, including how particular interior coverings and ventilation practices varied between communities and periods. Archaeology preserves post patterns exceptionally well in some village sites. From those patterns, researchers can estimate dimensions and identify repeated rebuilding. But bark walls vanish. Sleeping mats vanish. Temporary winter draft barriers vanish. The small adjustments that determine whether your feet feel cold at midnight rarely leave archaeological signatures. Later written descriptions help reconstruct the missing details. Yet they describe communities already experiencing profound political and economic change. The safest picture is therefore one of variation. There was no single longhouse interior frozen forever in time. You turn toward the wall. Bark separates you from the winter night. It lacks the enormous thermal mass of Earth, so fires and household activity matter greatly. Yet the building's communal scale helps compensate. Many people occupy one protected envelope. Multiple hearths distribute warmth. Sleeping areas concentrate insulation around bodies. The surrounding forest weakens some winds before they even reach the structure. Several systems overlap again. You can feel another important advantage beneath the sleeping platforms. Elevation. Cold ground continually draws heat from anything warm resting directly against it. Raised sleeping areas reduce direct contact with that surface. They also position sleepers slightly above the coldest air that can settle along the floor. Add mats, skins, blankets, and other insulating materials, and a sleeping platform becomes a carefully protected pocket. Your body supplies the final ingredient. It warms the air trapped beneath your coverings. After several minutes, the bedding feels much warmer than the surrounding room. This is why the question, how warm was the longhouse, remains incomplete. The building might feel cool. Your sleeping place could feel comfortable. The two conditions coexist. Nearby, food hangs or rests in storage areas. Corn and other agricultural products could become crucial winter supplies among northeastern farming peoples. Dried foods preserve the energy of warmer seasons. Hunting, fishing, gathering, and trade contributed additional resources according to location and community. Meals prepared over interior fires serve two purposes at once. They feed people and release warmth. Steam rises from cooking. The smell fills the long space. Your stomach reacts before you consciously notice it. Food is part of architecture because the body itself is part of the heating system. Without enough calories, even excellent clothing becomes less effective at maintaining comfort. The body must continuously produce heat. Winter demands fuel inside and outside. Someone adds wood to a hearth. A flame climbs briefly, illuminating the curved roof framework. The firewood came from the forest surrounding the settlement, but gathering it still required labor. Winter fuel does not magically walk through the doorway. People collect it, carry it, store it, and sometimes dry it. A communal household can distribute that work. Older children may help with suitable tasks. Adults divide responsibilities according to cultural expectations, ability, season, and circumstance. Shared architecture encourages shared survival. That social dimension is easy to underestimate. Imagine being alone in this forest. Every time you gather fuel, your fire remains unattended. Every repair belongs to you. Every meal requires your effort. Illness could become disastrous. Within a household, labour continues even when one person cannot perform it. Warmth is therefore partly a relationship between people. Community is insulation of another kind. The thought settles quietly as you listen to voices moving through the longhouse. No single person is keeping this building alive. Everyone contributes. The fires burn because fuel was gathered. The bark remains secure because someone repaired it. Food exists because people planted, harvested, hunted, gathered, preserved, or traded. Children learn by watching. Knowledge survives because it is practiced. Outside, snow continues falling. You can hear occasional clumps sliding from branches onto the roof. The bark responds with a dull, gentle sound. Nobody looks concerned. The structure has endured storms before. You settle near one of the fires and look along the long central passage. Small pools of orange light repeat into the distance. Between them are shadows, sleeping spaces, stored goods, and quiet human movement. The building feels less like one enormous room than a neighbourhood beneath a single roof. Its warmth comes from that shared life. Eventually, however, you must leave the forest. Far to the southwest, winter behaves differently. Snow may still fall, especially at elevation, but sunlight becomes stronger and the air often becomes much drier. There, builders discover another way to use earth. Instead of covering rounded timber lodges with soil, they raise thick walls toward the sun. Those walls absorb warmth during daylight. Then after darkness arrives, they surrender it slowly. The next winter secret waits inside stone, clay, and sunlight. You leave the snowy northeastern forest and travel southwest, where winter reveals a completely different personality. The sky becomes wider and clearer. Snow may still whiten mesas, mountains, and high desert settlements. But sunlight often returns with remarkable intensity after a freezing night. The air feels dry against your lips, under direct sun. A wall can feel almost warm while shaded ground nearby remains bitterly cold. That contrast becomes useful. Ahead, compact buildings rise from the landscape in tiers of earth-coloured walls. Their surfaces seem almost carved from the ground itself. You have entered the world of Pueblo architecture. Across the southwest, Pueblo peoples developed substantial settlements using locally available materials such as stone, earth, clay, timber, and plant matter. Construction varied greatly according to location, community, and historical period, yet thick earthen masonry repeatedly offered an important advantage. It changed temperature slowly. During daylight, sunlight strikes exposed walls and roofs. Some of that solar energy warms the outer surfaces. Heat gradually travels into the massive material rather than instantly passing through it. After sunset, when desert air cools rapidly, stored heat can continue moving through those walls. The building becomes a thermal reservoir. Again, it is not creating energy. It is delaying its movement. That delay can make winter nights considerably easier to manage. You place your palm against a sunlit wall. The surface feels pleasantly mild. Move your hand into a shaded recess, and the difference becomes obvious. The wall has been collecting sunlight while you travelled. This simple sensation explains a sophisticated principle of passive heating. Thermal mass works best when daily temperature swings provide energy to absorb. The southwest offers dramatic swings. A clear winter afternoon may feel comfortable in direct sunlight, yet temperatures can plunge after darkness. Thick walls soften that transition. They make the interior less responsive to every sudden change outside. You step through a doorway. The brightness disappears. Your eyes require several moments to adjust to the dim interior, but your skin immediately notices that the air feels more stable. It is not summer warm. it is protected. That distinction remains important. Pueblo architecture did not eliminate winter cold, and historical households still relied upon fires, clothing, bedding, food, and communal practices. The walls simply improved the odds. They slowed heat loss. They reduced exposure. They turned sunlight into a resource. Building orientation could increase those benefits. South-facing walls in the northern hemisphere receive valuable winter sunlight because the sun travels relatively low across the southern sky. Buildings and plazas positioned with solar exposure in mind can therefore gain passive warmth during colder months. However, you should be cautious about imagining every Pueblo settlement as a perfectly calculated solar machine. Human settlements serve many purposes simultaneously. Defense, ceremony, water access, terrain, farming, kinship, tradition, and available building space can all influence orientation. Researchers continue debating how deliberately solar geometry shaped particular ancestral Pueblo structures. Some alignments appear suggestive. Others may reflect practical terrain or cultural priorities that are harder to reconstruct. A doorway facing sunlight does not automatically prove that heating was its only purpose. History rarely offers explanations that tidy. Still, indigenous builders living within these landscapes understood seasonal sunlight through direct experience. You do not need modern computer modeling to notice which wall becomes warm every winter afternoon. Stand beside it long enough, your hands will tell you. The materials themselves are equally important. Adobe commonly refers to earth mixed with water and often plant fibers, shaped into bricks and dried in the sun. Other Pueblo construction traditions used stone masonry covered with earth and plaster. Walls could become impressively thick. Earth and plaster helped seal gaps and protect surfaces, though it required maintenance because rain, snow, wind, and ordinary wear gradually damaged it. A house made partly from earth demands a continuing relationship with earth. Surfaces must be repaired, cracks must be noticed, water must be managed. Maintenance becomes seasonal knowledge. You run your fingers gently across a plastered wall. Its texture is slightly uneven. That unevenness reminds you that architecture here is maintained by hands rather than hidden behind factory-made panels. Fresh layers can be applied when surfaces deteriorate. The work repeats across generations. A child sees adults repairing a wall and learns what a healthy wall should look like. That lesson contains climate knowledge without requiring a written manual. There is a quirky pleasure in realizing how much work the sun performs for free. No one gathers it. No one carries it home. No one stacks sunlight beside the doorway. It simply arrives. The challenge is arranging materials so that some of its energy becomes useful after the sun disappears. Thick earthen walls accomplish this slowly. Dark interior surfaces and floors may absorb additional warmth where sunlight enters directly. Depending upon the structure, then evening arrives. The outdoor air cools. The building begins releasing stored heat. This is passive heating in its most ancient form. You walk farther inside. A small hearth produces another layer of warmth. The smell of burning wood mingles with dry earth and food. Smoke must still be managed through openings or other ventilation arrangements appropriate to the particular structure. As elsewhere, sealing a room completely would create serious problems. People breathe. Cooking releases moisture. Fire consumes oxygen and produces smoke. Warmth requires controlled exchange with the outside world. The dry climate helps in some ways. Keeping insulating materials dry is easier when ambient humidity remains low, although snow, rain, and roof drainage can still cause difficulties. Wood itself may be scarce compared with northeastern forests. That makes efficient use of fuel especially valuable. A thick-walled room that retains heat reduces the need for an enormous continuous fire. Every armful saved matters. You can appreciate this by imagining the labor behind fuel. Someone must locate suitable wood. Someone must carry it. In landscapes where timber grows farther from settlements, transportation becomes costly in time and calories. Architecture that uses sunlight and thermal mass reduces pressure on those resources. The building becomes a partner in fuel conservation. Now look at the larger settlement. Rooms cluster together. Shared walls provide another advantage. An interior wall separating two occupied rooms loses far less heat than an exterior wall facing freezing night air. Compact multi-room construction therefore reduces exposed surface area. Some rooms may also shelter others from direct wind. The settlement itself behaves almost like one large thermal organism. One building protects the next. This is not unlike the communal logic you saw inside the longhouse. The shape differs. The principle of shared protection remains. You climb toward a higher level. Historically, access arrangements varied, and some Pueblo buildings used ladders to reach rooftops or upper entrances. From above, you can see how closely rooms fit together. The afternoon sun touches southern surfaces while northern areas remain cooler. Snow survives longest in shadows. The lesson is visible across the entire settlement. Sunlight has geography. Warmth has geography too. A household learns both. Another fascinating feature lies beneath some Pueblo communities. Ceremonial underground or partly underground spaces, commonly known today as kivas, demonstrate the thermal moderation offered by earth contact construction. Their primary significance is cultural and ceremonial rather than simply climatic, yet being partly below ground naturally buffers temperature fluctuations. The surrounding soil changes temperature more slowly than exposed air. You have already encountered this principle inside earth lodges. Here it appears within another architectural tradition and another cultural meaning. Similar physics can serve very different human purposes. That is worth remembering. Architecture is never only engineering. A home expresses relationships, beliefs, social structures, traditions, and identity while also keeping snow away from your bedding. Reducing it to thermal efficiency would miss most of its human meaning. At the same time, ignoring its thermal intelligence would miss something equally important. People build beauty, meaning, and survival into the same walls. Night begins approaching. The desert sky changes from pale blue toward deeper violet. The sunlight that warmed the walls disappears from lower surfaces first. Almost immediately, exposed air becomes sharper. You feel the temperature falling around your hands, inside the thick-walled room. However, change comes more slowly. The wall beside you still carries warmth gathered during daylight. A modest fire glows. Food cooks nearby. Clothing and bedding wait for the colder hours. The household is prepared for a night that may fall below freezing. No single technique carries the burden. Sunlight helps. Earth helps. Shared walls help. Fire helps. Clothing helps. Human bodies help. Once again, survival emerges from combination. This becomes clearer when you compare all the homes you have visited. The Earth Lodge uses massive soil coverings. The tipi uses hides, liners, controlled airflow, and portability. The longhouse uses bark, shared walls, several hearths, and communal occupation. Pueblo architecture uses thick masonry and solar exposure. Different materials, different shapes. The same quiet question: how do you slow heat from leaving the human body? There is no universal answer because there is no universal North American environment. That diversity is precisely what makes the architecture so interesting. The sun finally disappears. A thin line of orange remains along the horizon before darkness takes it. Stars emerge quickly in the dry air. Outside, frost begins forming on exposed surfaces. Inside, the wall changes temperature almost imperceptibly. You sit beside it and listen to the small fire. The room smells of earth, smoke, and evening food. For the first time, you begin thinking less about individual house types and more about the materials themselves. Earth, bark, wood, grass, reeds, hide, stone. Each seems ordinary when lying alone on the landscape. Yet each can trap air, block wind, store heat, shed water, support weight, or seal an opening when used correctly. The real ingenuity may not lie in finding exotic materials. It lies in understanding familiar ones completely. And as the desert night deepens around you, those humble materials are ready to reveal exactly how much winter protection they can provide. You remain beside the thick earthen wall while the desert night settles outside, and your attention shifts from architecture to ingredients. Every shelter you have entered began with materials already present somewhere in the surrounding environment. There were no trucks delivering standardized insulation. There were no rolls of fiberglass waiting in warehouses. Instead, builders worked with earth, timber, bark, grasses, reeds, stone, hides, mats, and other locally available materials. Their effectiveness depended upon arrangement. A handful of dry grass seems almost useless against a deadly winter. Place enough of it between protective layers, however, and something important happens. Air becomes trapped. Still air conducts heat relatively poorly, which makes trapped pockets of air useful for insulation. Modern insulation relies upon the same basic principle. The materials have changed dramatically. The physics has not. You lift a bundle of dry grass. It feels light and almost fragile between your fingers, especially compared with the heavy wall beside you. Yet its countless stems create tiny spaces where air can remain relatively still. Pack it thoughtfully within a layered structure, and those spaces resist heat transfer. Compress it too tightly, soak it with water, or expose it directly to wind, and performance changes. Material alone is never the whole answer. How you use it matters. This explains why indigenous winter architecture often relied upon combinations rather than one supposedly perfect substance. A structural frame might provide strength. Bark could resist weather. Grass could add insulation. Earth might create thermal mass and reduce drafts. Hides could form flexible coverings. Mats could protect sleeping areas. Each material performs a different task. You can think of the house as a team. Earth is strong but heavy. Hide is flexible but comparatively thin. Grass insulates but needs protection. Timber carries loads but eventually decays. Bark sheds weather but requires careful placement. Winter survival comes from making imperfect materials cooperate. You've already felt that cooperation beneath an earth lodge roof. Timber supported tremendous weight. Branches created intermediate layers. Vegetation helped separate materials. Earth formed the massive outer barrier. Snow sometimes added another insulating layer above everything. Remove one element, and the others must work harder. The same principle appears inside portable dwellings. Hide blocks much of the wind. A liner changes airflow. Dry bedding interrupts heat loss into the ground. Robes trap warmth around sleepers. The structure becomes a sequence of barriers rather than one thick wall. Your own clothing follows exactly this logic. Imagine wearing one enormous sheet of material against freezing wind. Now imagine several layers with small pockets of air between them. The layered arrangement generally performs better when those layers remain dry and reasonably loose. A dwelling can exploit the same effect. This may be the least glamorous secret of historical winter survival. Warmth often hides inside empty space. Not large empty rooms, unfortunately. Tiny trapped spaces. Air that cannot move freely becomes useful. Air rushing through a gap becomes a problem. That difference turns draft control into a major concern. You walk toward a wall where two materials meet. Even a narrow opening can allow cold air to enter continuously when wind pressure outside becomes strong. The temperature of the wall itself may matter less than that stream of moving air. Seal the gap, and comfort improves immediately. Builders could use plant fibers, earth, hides, bark overlaps, mats, or other available materials to reduce unwanted airflow. Repairs mattered because structures changed. Wood shrinks, earth cracks, bark curls, hide stretches, storms pull at coverings, snow adds weight. A shelter that performed beautifully last winter may require attention before the next one. Maintenance is therefore part of insulation. There is something almost unfair about houses. They never remain finished. The moment you complete one, weather begins negotiating revisions. Traditional households understood that negotiation intimately. People inspected coverings and replaced damaged materials. Earth and plaster required renewal. Portable coverings needed repair. Bark panels could deteriorate. Roof layers might need adjustment. Small interventions prevented larger failures. One mainstream historical reality becomes obvious here. Indigenous builders selected construction materials according to regional availability. Woodland peoples lived amid forests containing bark and timber. Plains communities developed portable architecture suited to mobility and available animal resources. Agricultural Missouri River villages invested in timber and earth. Southwestern communities became masters of stone and earthen construction. Environment did not mechanically dictate culture, but it strongly influenced practical possibilities. You build with what your landscape can provide. Then culture teaches you what to do with it. This second part matters enormously. Two people can stand beside the same tree and see different possibilities. Knowledge transforms raw material into technology. Someone must know when bark can be harvested effectively. Someone must understand how timber behaves under load. Someone must recognize which grasses dry well. Someone must prepare hides properly. Someone must know the correct consistency for an earthen mixture. The material contains potential. Skill unlocks it. That skill can require years of observation. A child might begin by carrying small materials. Later, that child watches adults place structural elements. Eventually, experience becomes detailed enough to notice mistakes before they become dangerous. Architecture survives through memory as much as through wood. You hear a faint scraping sound. Someone is smoothing fresh earth over a small crack. The repair looks insignificant. It may stop cold air or moisture from entering later. A few minutes of labor now can save hours of discomfort during a storm. There is a satisfying practicality to it. No dramatic ceremonies required. Just fix the crack. One quirky material deserves particular attention because modern people often underestimate it. Reeds and grasses can perform surprisingly useful roles in building. They are light, renewable, easy to gather in suitable environments, and naturally filled with structures that trap air. Woven mats made from plant materials can become wall coverings, floor layers, partitions, bedding foundations, or other household components. Their exact uses varied widely. A mat does not look like sophisticated insulation. Lie on one above frozen ground, however, and your opinion changes quickly. The same applies to animal hides. People sometimes imagine hides simply as a windproof sheet. Its thermal behavior depends heavily upon preparation and whether fur remains attached. Fur traps air exceptionally well. A fur-bearing hide used as clothing or bedding can therefore provide excellent insulation. A scraped hide used for a shelter covering serves different purposes. The distinction matters. Not every hide performs the same job. Materials have biographies. They begin as plants, animals, soil, or stone. Then human labor transforms them. Historians and archaeologists still face uncertainty when reconstructing some of these layered systems because the most thermally important materials are often the least likely to survive. Stone endures. Post holes endure as stains in soil. Tiny fragments of charred wood may survive. But dry grass insulation usually disappears. Woven plant fibers decay. Hide coverings vanish. Temporary winter mats leave little trace. Researchers can therefore reconstruct a structure's skeleton more confidently than its soft insulating skin. That creates an interesting bias. The archaeological house may look colder than the living house actually was. Imagine finding only the wooden frame of your winter coat thousands of years from now. You might wonder why anyone wore such an uncomfortable thing. Missing layers change interpretation. Ethnographic descriptions and indigenous oral traditions help restore some of those lost details, although caution remains necessary when applying later evidence to much earlier periods. Practices evolve, trade changes available materials, colonial disruption alters settlement patterns, introduced fabrics, metal tools, canvas, and other goods can influence construction. There is no single timeless moment. You continue examining the materials around you. Touch earth. It feels dense. Touch dry grass. It feels light. Touch bark. It feels rigid and layered. Touch hide. It bends. Each handles heat differently. Earth excels at moderating temperature swings because of its mass. Light fibrous materials excel at trapping air. Dense coverings can block wind. Reflective firelight warms surfaces directly through radiation. The best winter shelter combines useful properties according to circumstances. Moisture complicates everything. Imagine dry grass beneath you. Its air-filled structure resists heat transfer. Now soak that grass. Water fills spaces that once held air. The material becomes heavier and transfers heat differently. It may begin rotting as well. Dryness is therefore a thermal resource. Roof design matters partly because roofs must keep insulating layers protected from precipitation. Drainage matters because standing water can damage earth and plant materials. Ventilation matters because people themselves create moisture through breathing and cooking. Even while sleeping, you're changing the building's interior climate. Several people breathing through a long winter night release substantial water vapor. Cooking adds more. Wet clothing brought inside contributes additional moisture. Without some ventilation, condensation can develop on cold surfaces. So the house must remain sealed against unwanted drafts while still breathing enough to stay dry. There is that balance again. You cannot win by maximizing one variable. A perfectly airtight shelter with a smoky fire becomes dangerous. A perfectly ventilated shelter becomes freezing. A massively thick roof without enough structural support becomes hazardous. An enormous fire without enough fuel becomes impossible to maintain. Successful architecture lives between extremes. That may be why these buildings feel so responsive. They require observation. You listen, you smell, you touch. Smoke tells you whether ventilation is working. Cold movement near your ankles reveals a draft. Dampness reveals moisture. A sagging covering demands attention. A change in fire behavior tells you something about airflow. The inhabitants become part of the building's control system. No thermostat clicks quietly on the wall. You are the thermostat, and you are considerably more complicated. The fire near you has burned lower now. Its warmth seems gentle rather than intense. Yet the materials surrounding the occupied space keep that modest heat from disappearing immediately. The wall absorbs some. Bedding traps some. Clothing traps more. The roof blocks moving air. Every humble layer contributes. Outside, frost spreads across exposed ground. Inside, dry grasses remain still beneath sleeping places. Bark waits against the weather. Earth changes temperature slowly. Wood holds the structure together. None of these materials can survive winter alone. Together, they create shelter. But there is one element in this arrangement that remains difficult. The fire. It provides precious warmth, light, and cooking heat. Yet it also produces smoke inside enclosed spaces. Keeping the flames alive is easy compared with making their smoke behave. As the room darkens and a thin grey ribbon rises overhead, your next winter problem drifts upward with it. You watch the thin ribbon of smoke rise above the fire, curling slowly before disappearing toward an opening overhead. For several moments, everything works beautifully. The flames remain small and steady. Warmth reaches your hands. Smoke travels upward instead of settling around your face, and enough fresh air enters to keep the fire alive. Then the wind outside changes. Almost immediately, the smoke hesitates. A grey strand bends sideways, spreads beneath the roof, and drifts toward the people gathered nearby. Someone notices. An opening is adjusted, the fire is rearranged, and the smoke gradually begins climbing again. Winter warmth requires negotiation. Fire may seem like the obvious answer to extreme cold, but an indoor fire creates problems alongside its benefits. It consumes oxygen. It produces smoke and gases. Sparks can threaten combustible materials. Cooking creates moisture. Too much ventilation wastes warmth, while too little can make the interior unhealthy or dangerous. Historical households therefore needed fires that were controlled rather than simply enormous. This is one reason the image of a roaring blaze filling every winter dwelling can be misleading. Large flames consume fuel quickly. They produce more smoke. They can become difficult to manage inside structures containing wood, bark, grass, hides, and bedding. A smaller, carefully maintained hearth can be far more useful. You move your hands toward the glowing coals. Radiant heat reaches your palms instantly. That warmth does not require the entire room's air to become hot first. Energy travels directly from the fire towards surrounding bodies and surfaces. This makes a central hearth particularly effective when people gather nearby. You heat the occupied zone. The distant corners can remain cooler. That is enough. Fire also supports activities beyond heating. It cooks food. It heats water. It provides light after sunset. It dries certain damp materials when managed carefully. It can assist with tool making and other household work. One modest hearth, therefore, performs several jobs simultaneously. Efficiency is hidden inside daily routine. You are not burning fuel merely to change a number on a thermometer. There is no thermometer. Instead, the fire becomes the center of evening life. Across indigenous North America, hearth arrangements varied tremendously. Earth lodges often placed a hearth near the center beneath a roof opening. Longhouses could contain several fires along their length, serving neighboring household groups. Tipis generally organized interior life around a central fire when one was used. Southwestern rooms employed hearths and fireplaces in forms that changed across regions and periods. No universal design existed, yet everyone faced the same stubborn fact. Smoke rises only when conditions allow it. Warm smoke tends to rise because heated gases are less dense than cooler surrounding air. An opening above the fire can take advantage of that natural movement, but wind pressure outside can disturb the process. Air entering through doors or gaps can redirect smoke. A poorly positioned fire can smoke badly. Wet fuel can make matters worse. The inhabitants must observe continuously. You smell the difference when a damp piece of wood begins burning. The smoke becomes heavier. The fire hisses softly. Less energy is available for useful heating because some must first evaporate water from the fuel. Dry firewood therefore carries another hidden advantage. It burns more efficiently and generally produces a more manageable fire. Keeping fuel protected from snow and moisture becomes part of winter preparation. The work begins long before bedtime. Someone gathers wood. Someone transports it. Someone breaks or cuts it into useful sizes according to available tools and practices. Someone stores enough to survive periods when storms make gathering difficult. A winter fire is accumulated summer and autumn labor. Every glowing coal has a history. Fuel availability also differs enormously across landscapes. In eastern forests, wood may appear abundant, though collecting sufficient dry fuel still requires effort. River valleys crossing the plains provide wooded areas in otherwise open country. In treeless or sparsely wooded locations, people may use alternative fuels when available. You have already encountered one of the more memorable examples. Dried bison dung could burn. This sounds like the sort of historical detail invented to keep sleepy listeners awake for another 30 seconds. It is quite practical. Dung from grazing animals contains partially digested plant material. Once thoroughly dried, it can become combustible on landscapes where wood is limited. Ignoring an available fuel source because it lacks elegance would be remarkably wasteful. The resulting fire can provide cooking heat and warmth. Its usefulness demonstrates a broader survival principle. Use what the environment actually gives you. Do not wait for the environment you wish you had. The smell inside a dwelling depended partly upon fuel. Wood species produce different aromas and smoke characteristics. Dried plant materials behave differently again. Cooking contributes its own scents. Add hides, earth, people, stored foods, and perhaps dogs, and the historical interior becomes far more aromatic than a modern living room. You would notice it immediately. After several days, perhaps less so. Human noses adapt surprisingly quickly. Smoke itself could penetrate clothing and structural materials. Timbers above long-used hearths might become darkened. Bark and hides could carry smoky odors. These traces become part of the sensory landscape of winter life. The fire leaves evidence even when extinguished. Archaeologists appreciate this. Hearths can survive as recognizable features long after roofs and walls disappear. Charcoal fragments can sometimes help researchers study fuel use. Burned soil may mark repeated heating. Ash deposits provide additional clues. The hearth is often one of the most archaeologically visible parts of a vanished home. Yet visibility creates another interpretive problem. Finding a hearth tells you where fire existed. It doesn't tell you exactly how large that fire usually was, nor does it reveal how often someone tended it during a freezing night. Researchers still debate many aspects of historical indoor climate because hearth evidence cannot reconstruct every moment of use. Ethnographic descriptions offer valuable clues, but practices change through time and differed between communities. Some fires may have been allowed to decline significantly overnight. Others could be maintained more consistently during extreme cold. Family size, fuel supply, weather, dwelling type, and sleeping insulation all influence the decision. There is no single answer. You can understand the logic by settling into bedding yourself. Suppose thick robes surround you. Several dry layers lie beneath your body. The shelter blocks most wind. Other people occupy the same protected space. Do you need a large fire burning continuously? Perhaps not. Your personal insulation may preserve enough warmth while a bed of coals keeps the hearth ready for morning. Now imagine inadequate bedding during severe cold. The fire becomes much more important. Winter systems compensate for one another. Better insulation reduces fuel demand. More fuel can compensate somewhat for weaker insulation. More people increase body heat. A smaller interior concentrates available warmth. Architecture, fire, clothing, and behavior are connected. The cleverness lies in managing the whole network. You hear a log settle into the coals. Tiny sparks rise. Someone nearby shifts a vessel farther from the hottest area. Cooking must be managed carefully because open fires offer uneven heat. There is no numbered temperature setting. Distance becomes the control. Move the vessel closer. Move it farther away. Add fuel. Spread the coals. Cover the contents. Experience replaces buttons. The same hands managing dinner are also managing indoor climate. Steam rises from the food. That steam introduces moisture. Several people breathing introduce more. Damp garments drying near the fire add still more. Ventilation must remove some of this water vapor, especially when exterior surfaces remain extremely cold. Otherwise, condensation can form. You might notice droplets or dampness where warm, moist air meets colder material. Again, a little heat must escape so the dwelling can remain functional. That sounds inefficient only if you imagine heat retention as the sole goal. The real goal is safe comfort. Fresh air matters. Dry materials matter. Smoke removal matters. Warmth matters. The house balances all four. Fire safety creates another constant concern. Many traditional building materials are combustible. Dry grass burns extremely well. So does bark. Hide can be damaged. Bedding can catch sparks. A central hearth therefore needs a defined location and careful supervision. People understand where children should move. Fuel is placed deliberately. Hot embers remain contained. Roof openings help carry sparks and smoke upward, though no system eliminates risk entirely. Historical communities experienced accidental fires, just as societies everywhere have. That reality should temper any romantic picture of the glowing hearth. Fire is a useful servant and a terrible houseguest when ignored. A gust passes outside. The smoke shifts again. This time, someone responds almost before you notice. The movement is small. An adjustment changes airflow. The grey ribbon straightens. Years of experience can make complicated environmental management appear effortless. That may explain why visiting observers sometimes miss the intelligence involved. When people perform a task every day, they rarely narrate each decision. They simply move. A hand adjusts a covering. A piece of fuel changes position. Someone opens a vent slightly. The result looks ordinary, but ordinary competence is exactly what keeps the household functioning. The flames now sink lower. Orange becomes red. The air cools gradually. You pull your covering closer and notice that your body remains warm despite the declining fire. That sensation prepares you for another important lesson. The hearth cannot protect you equally throughout the night. Eventually, the person sleeping farthest from it must depend upon something else. The coldest threat may not even come from the air. It comes silently from beneath you. Frozen earth waits below every sleeper, ready to absorb warmth hour after hour. So before the fire becomes only glowing coals, you turn toward the sleeping places. There, layers of grass, mats, hides, robes, and raised surfaces create another kind of winter technology. The house protects the family, but tonight, the bed must protect the body. You move away from the fading hearth and toward the sleeping area, where winter survival becomes much more personal. The fire still glows behind you, yet the ground beneath your feet feels noticeably colder, especially where fewer insulating materials cover the floor. That cold surface can still warmth quietly for hours. You lower yourself toward the sleeping place and discover that what appears to be simple bedding is actually another carefully layered shelter. The first challenge lies beneath you. Your body constantly produces heat. and that warmth moves toward colder surroundings through several processes when you lie directly against frozen or deeply chilled ground. Conduction becomes especially important. Your warm body transfers energy into the colder surface touching it. The ground seems to drink warmth continuously. You can test the principle with your hand. Place your palm against bare cold earth, and discomfort arrives quickly. Now put a thick layer of dry plant material between your skin and the ground. The sensation changes. Heat still escapes, but more slowly. That delay matters through a long winter night. Traditional sleeping arrangements varied enormously among indigenous peoples, just as their houses did. Some dwellings incorporated raised sleeping platforms or benches. Others used mats, grasses, hides, robes, blankets, or combinations of locally available materials. Household wealth, trade connections, season, region, and individual circumstances could all influence what someone slept upon. There was no universal Native American bed. The thermal principle, however, remained familiar. Separate the body from cold surfaces, trap still air around it, keep those insulating layers reasonably dry. You settle onto a thick foundation. Dry grasses or woven plant materials can create countless tiny pockets of trapped air. Hides placed above them provide another barrier. A fur-bearing robe can add significantly more insulation because hair traps additional air near the body. Then another covering lies above you. Suddenly the cool room matters less. Your body begins warming the small enclosed space beneath the covering. Within several minutes, your immediate surroundings feel noticeably different from the air near your face. This is your smallest winter shelter. It moves when you move. The building blocks wind and precipitation. The bedding prevents rapid heat loss. Your metabolism supplies the heat. That combination explains why historical people could sleep inside rooms that modern occupants might consider surprisingly cold. They were not necessarily heating the room to modern standards. They were heating themselves. The distinction is enormous. Modern central heating encourages you to wear relatively light clothing indoors and maintain a broad volume of warm air. Historical winter strategies often reversed those priorities. The room could remain cooler because insulation stayed close to the body. That saves fuel. Why spend precious firewood warming the roof when your feet are the ones complaining? It is difficult to argue with the logic. Raised sleeping surfaces add another advantage. Cold air is denser than warm air and tends to settle toward lower areas when circulation allows. A platform can lift a sleeper slightly above the coldest air near the floor. More importantly, it creates separation from direct ground contact. The space underneath may contain stored objects or simply act as another thermal break, depending upon the dwelling. Inside northeastern longhouses, sleeping platforms arranged along the sides could provide organized family spaces above floor level. In other structures, beds or benches served similar practical functions. Earth lodges also incorporated sleeping areas around their interiors. The exact forms differed. The desire for comfortable rest did not. Sleep is not optional during winter. Exhausted people make mistakes. They gather fuel less efficiently. They travel less safely. They become worse at maintaining shelters, preparing food, and responding to sudden weather. A sleeping system therefore supports the entire household economy. Warm bedding is survival equipment. One curious detail is how much value historical communities could place upon robes and blankets. Such items were not merely decorations or symbols of comfort. They represented stored labor and physical protection. Producing a hide robe required obtaining the animal and processing the skin. Woven blankets required fibers, preparation, skill, and many hours of work. Later, trade introduced new kinds of blankets and textiles into indigenous economies, sometimes transforming clothing and sleeping practices. Before those trade goods became widespread, local materials already performed similar essential roles. A good covering could be precious. You would repair it. You would keep it dry. You would not casually leave it outside because the weather looked pleasant at lunchtime. Winter has an excellent memory for such mistakes. Moisture remains the enemy. A damp sleeping layer loses much of its effectiveness because water conducts heat more readily than trapped air. Evaporation can cool the body further. This makes drying bedding and clothing near a fire useful, although placing combustible materials too close introduces obvious danger. The household must balance drying against fire safety. Again, winter refuses simple solutions. Move something too far from the hearth, and it stays damp. Move it too close, and everyone suddenly becomes extremely awake. Experience determines a safe distance. You hear soft movement nearby. Someone turns beneath a covering. Another sleeper shifts closer to a family member. Shared sleeping arrangements can conserve warmth because bodies produce heat continuously. Parents and children sleeping near one another gain practical thermal benefits alongside social closeness. Dogs may sometimes occupy human living spaces too, depending upon community and circumstance. Every warm body contributes something. This is not enough to heat a large dwelling alone. Inside insulated bedding, however, even modest contributions become valuable. Your feet finally feel warmer. That takes time because the bedding does not generate heat independently. It merely slows your losses. Your own metabolism must gradually warm the trapped air. This is why entering bedding while already dangerously cold can remain risky. Insulation preserves available warmth more effectively than it creates new warmth. Activity, food, fire, and warm companions may help restore temperature before sleep. Historical winter routines therefore connect again. Eat, warm yourself, dry clothing, prepare bedding, then settle down. The sequence has practical value. Researchers still face considerable uncertainty when reconstructing ancient sleeping arrangements. Because bedding is among the least durable parts of a household, plant fibers decay. Hides rarely survive under ordinary archaeological conditions. Wooden platforms disappear unless preserved unusually well or inferred from structural evidence. Excavations may reveal a flaw without showing exactly what covered it. Historical descriptions from later centuries can help, but those observations belong to particular communities and moments. Scholars therefore avoid assuming that one documented arrangement represents every earlier household. Even within a single village, families likely differed. Some possessed more hides, some had better sleeping platforms, some households were larger. A newly built lodge differed from an aging one. Real history contains unequal mattresses that may be among its most relatable truths. You pull the covering closer beneath your chin. The hearth is now mostly coals. Your face feels the cool air above the bedding, while everything below your shoulders remains comfortably enclosed. This temperature difference illustrates the microclimate perfectly. The dwelling itself might be only modestly warmer than freezing in severe conditions. Near the hearth, radiant warmth could make it feel considerably better. Inside thick bedding, body heat could create a much warmer pocket. There is no single meaningful indoor temperature. There are layers. Your fingertips find the edge of the sleeping mat. Its woven texture feels rough. Beneath it lies another layer. Each barrier slows conduction downward. Each pocket of air reduces heat transfer. You begin appreciating why floor coverings matter nearly as much as roof coverings. Heat escapes in every direction. People naturally focus on walls because walls are visible. The ground is less dramatic. It waits patiently beneath you all night. A thoughtful sleeping system recognizes that threat. So does clothing. You may keep substantial garments on during especially cold conditions rather than changing into thin, specialized sleepwear. Dry socks or equivalent foot coverings become especially important where traditions provide them. Head coverings can also conserve warmth because exposed skin continues losing heat. The exact garments differ across cultures. The principle remains straightforward. Do not remove insulation simply because darkness arrived. The body has no idea that bedtime should involve lighter clothing. It only knows temperature. Outside, snow brushes faintly against the structure. The sound is soft enough to merge with breathing around you. Someone tends the coals once more, and a brief orange glow travels across the interior. You can smell the renewed smoke. Then darkness returns. There is something deeply efficient about this moment. The fire no longer performs most of the work. The bedding does. It requires no fuel while you sleep. A well-prepared robe does not need someone waking every hour to feed it branches. Dry grass beneath you burns nothing. A raised platform consumes no wood. Passive insulation keeps work in silently. That silence saves labor. It also saves calories. Every journey outside to gather fuel exposes someone to cold and demands physical effort. Better bedding can therefore reduce more than heat loss. It can reduce how hard the household must work to replace that heat. Your eyes grow heavy. The room is quiet now except for wind and occasional movement. You understand why sleeping above the cold ground forms such an important part of winter survival. Yet your bedding begins protecting you only after warmth reaches your body. Something must preserve that warmth while you work outdoors, collect fuel, hunt, travel, or simply move between dwellings. The house cannot follow you. The bed certainly cannot. So people carry another shelter wherever they go. It is softer than bark, lighter than earth, and fitted directly around the human body. As morning approaches beyond the walls, your next winter house is already hanging nearby. It is clothing. Morning arrives slowly, announced first by movement around the hearth and then by pale light filtering into the dwelling. You leave the warmth of your bedding reluctantly. Cold air reaches your shoulders immediately, reminding you how effectively those layers created their own tiny climate. Your first instinct is simple. Put the warmth back on. The winter clothing waiting nearby is more than decoration, identity, or protection from snow. It is portable architecture. The walls now travel with you. This idea changes how you understand every shelter you've visited. A historical dwelling does not need to maintain modern room temperatures when its occupants remain insulated by clothing indoors. The house blocks the worst weather. Garments protect the individual. Bedding strengthens that protection during sleep. Fire supplies additional warmth when needed. Each layer reduces the burden placed upon the others. You begin dressing before approaching the entrance. Across indigenous North America, winter clothing varied enormously because climate, available animals, plant fibers, trade networks, cultural traditions, and technologies varied enormously. There was never one Native American winter outfit. Northern communities face conditions entirely different from those experienced in much of the Southwest. Plains clothing differed from woodland clothing. Even neighboring nations could have distinctive construction methods, decoration, preferred materials, and garment forms. Yet insulation remained a shared physical problem. One particularly useful material was fur. Animal fur works because countless hairs trap small pockets of air. That air remains relatively still, reducing the rate at which body heat escapes. The animal discovered the principle first, naturally. Humans simply became observant borrowers. A fur-bearing hide can therefore provide excellent protection when prepared and used appropriately. Different animals produce different kinds of fur. Some pelts offer dense underfur. Others provide longer guard hairs that help resist wind or moisture. People familiar with local animals understood these differences through generations of practical experience. A pelt was not merely a pelt. Its qualities determined its usefulness. On the plains, bison robes became especially valuable during cold weather. A winter bison hide could carry thick insulating hair. Wrapped around the body, it trapped warmth and reduced exposure to wind. Such robes could also become important sleeping coverings. Again, one object performs several jobs. Efficiency appears everywhere. You run your hand across thick fur. The outer tips feel cool. Push your fingers deeper, and the air near the hide feels noticeably warmer. That temperature gradient is insulation happening beneath your hand. Your body warms the inner layer. The fur slows that warmth from escaping. No flame is required. Your metabolism is the furnace. Garment construction matters almost as much as material. Loose gaps around openings can allow warmed air to escape and cold air to enter. Properly fitted clothing reduces that exchange while still allowing movement. Layers can be adjusted according to activity. Someone working hard outdoors may need less insulation temporarily, because muscular activity produces substantial heat. Stop moving and requirements change quickly. This creates another winter balancing act. Too little clothing causes dangerous cooling. Too much clothing during strenuous work can cause heavy sweating. Sweat introduces moisture. Then, when activity stops, damp garments can accelerate heat loss. The ideal strategy is not simply wearing everything available at once. You manage insulation according to conditions. Experienced winter travelers learn this lesson quickly. Stay warm. Avoid becoming unnecessarily wet. Keep dry layers available when possible. Modern cold weather specialists give similar advice because human physiology has not changed much. Historical clothing systems reach those practical conclusions through experience, rather than synthetic fabrics or laboratory testing. Footwear deserves special attention. Your feet remain close to snow and frozen ground. They also receive less warming movement when you stand still. Cold toes can turn an otherwise tolerable evening into a miserable one. Indigenous footwear traditions varied greatly, but moccasin-style footwear was widespread in many regions, with construction adapted to local conditions. Some winter footwear incorporated insulating liners or additional materials. Dry grass could sometimes serve as insulation in footwear among various northern peoples, depending upon local tradition. The idea is beautifully simple. Trap dry air around the foot. Replace damp insulating material when necessary. Your boot becomes a miniature sleeping platform. A quirky detail appears in the amount of maintenance footwear can demand. Soft-hide footwear offers flexibility and quiet movement, but wet conditions can challenge it. Drying, repairing, and replacing worn pieces becomes routine. Someone traveling regularly cannot treat footwear as an afterthought. A damaged seam several miles from shelter becomes considerably more interesting when snow reaches your skin. Hands require similar protection. Mittens are thermally efficient because fingers share a common warm space instead of being isolated individually. Different indigenous communities developed hand coverings suited to their environments. Head protection matters too. The old claim that humans lose most body heat through the head is oversimplified. You lose heat from exposed surfaces generally, if everything except your head is heavily insulated. However, the exposed head becomes an obvious source of heat loss. Covering it makes sense. Your face may remain partly exposed for visibility and breathing, leaving cheeks and nose vulnerable during severe conditions. People learn to turn away from wind. They raise coverings. They use landscape features. Clothing and behavior cooperate. You finally step outside. The cold strikes your face, but the rest of your body responds very differently from yesterday. Layers trap warmth near your torso. Your feet are separated from the snow. A covering protects your head. The wind still exists. It simply has fewer opportunities. Now you understand why judging a winter house without considering clothing produces a distorted picture. Imagine measuring an interior temperature of perhaps only a few degrees above freezing during severe weather. To someone wearing a light shirt, that sounds unbearable. To someone wearing substantial insulating garments beside a hearth, the experience can be entirely different. Comfort is a relationship between air temperature, radiant heat, wind, humidity, activity, clothing, food, and individual physiology. A thermometer alone cannot describe it. Historians still struggle to reconstruct some earlier indigenous clothing systems precisely because organic materials preserve poorly. Hide decays, fur disappears, plant fibers vanish. Garments surviving in museums often come from comparatively recent periods and may reflect trade materials introduced after European contact. Written descriptions can contain misunderstandings or stereotypes. Artwork may emphasize ceremonial appearance rather than ordinary winter layers. Researchers therefore combine archaeological evidence, historical accounts, surviving objects, indigenous knowledge, and environmental understanding. Even then, uncertainty remains. How many layers did one person wear during a particular storm 300 years ago? History cannot answer. The broader thermal logic is clearer. People used available insulating materials skillfully. They adjusted clothing to activity. They protected vulnerable extremities. They kept useful garments dry whenever possible. And clothing allowed indoor temperatures to remain lower without automatically becoming intolerable. You walk through the settlement. Smoke rises from several homes. People moving outside carry their insulation with them. Nobody expects the entire village atmosphere to be heated. That would be ambitious. Instead, each person creates a warm boundary close to the skin. This personal boundary also reduces the shock of entering and leaving a dwelling. If interiors were heated to modern tropical temperatures, stepping outside into severe cold would feel dramatic. A cooler interior combined with substantial clothing creates a smaller transition. People remain dressed for the season. The house provides additional protection rather than replacing clothing entirely. That can reduce fuel consumption significantly. You notice someone carrying wood. Physical work begins warming the body from within. Muscles consume energy and release heat. Soon the person may loosen a covering slightly to prevent overheating. Later, after stopping, it will be pulled tight again. The adjustment looks casual. It represents intimate knowledge of one's own thermal state. Winter survival depends upon noticing early. Cold fingers are information. Sweat is information. Numb feet are urgent information. Wind direction is information. A damp garment is information. People respond before discomfort becomes danger. Clothing itself carries social and cultural meaning far beyond thermal performance. Garments communicate identity. Decoration can express family, community, achievement, beauty, trade relationships, or personal skill. A warm robe does not stop being meaningful because it is practical. This is important. Historical people did not live inside engineering diagrams. They wanted useful things to be beautiful too. Dyed materials, painted hides, quill work, beadwork in later periods, and other decorative traditions could transform practical clothing into expressions of identity. Warmth and beauty share the same garment. You touch the edge of your imagined robe. Its weight settles comfortably around your shoulders. The smell of smoke has entered the material after nights beside the hearth. That smoky scent travels with you now. So does yesterday's warmth, in a sense. The robe was dried and protected indoors. It stored no meaningful heat overnight, but it preserved the ability to trap today's warmth efficiently. Care becomes part of performance. Neglect the garment and the system weakens. The same applies to every winter layer. House coverings need repair. Bedding needs drying. Footwear needs maintenance. Firewood needs protection. Food needs preservation. Nothing survives winter through one heroic invention. Survival comes from dozens of ordinary habits repeated correctly. You turn back toward the dwelling. Several people are gathering near the entrance. Inside, others prepare food around the hearth. Children move between adults. The building seems warmer now, though the fire has not changed greatly. Part of that warmth comes from the people themselves. One human body contributes modest heat. A household contributes more. Several related families sharing an enclosed structure can alter its thermal environment simply by living there. So you step back inside with everyone else. The entrance closes behind you. Voices fill the space. Warm clothing remains around warm bodies. The hearth glows at the center. And the next layer of winter protection is not something you can build, weave, or wear. It is the family sitting beside you. You step back into the dwelling with several other people, and the atmosphere changes almost before anyone reaches the fire. The entrance closes. Wind disappears behind the covering. Conversation fills the interior, and warm bodies settle into familiar places around the hearth. No one person produces much heat. Together, however, a household becomes another source of warmth. The effect is easy to underestimate because human heat arrives silently. There is no flame to watch. A resting adult continuously releases energy as the body maintains circulation. Breathing, digestion, brain activity, and countless other processes. Children contribute less individually, while active people can release considerably more. Place several people inside a protected structure, and their combined heat begins affecting the surrounding environment. This principle matters most when the dwelling already limits heat loss. Imagine 10 people standing outside on an exposed winter plain. Their bodies produce heat, but the wind carries most of that warmth away. Now place those same people inside a compact, insulated shelter. Their warmth remains concentrated. Add clothing, bedding, cooking, and controlled hearth. The entire balance changes. Architecture makes human heat useful. You have already experienced this inside the longhouse. Multiple related families occupied a shared structure, with hearths creating warm zones along the central passage. Earth lodges also accommodated households within one substantial thermal envelope. Even smaller portable dwellings benefited from family occupancy. Shared winter living was never merely an engineering decision, of course. Kinship, culture, household organization, Economic cooperation, tradition, and community identity shaped who lived together. Thermal benefits followed from those arrangements. You sit beside an older family member. The firelight moves across faces around you. Someone is preparing food. Another person works with a small object near the light. A child leans against an adult beneath a shared covering. Every ordinary action releases a little energy. The room feels alive because it is. This becomes particularly important after sunset. During daytime, people may travel, gather fuel, hunt, process food, repair structures, or perform other work. At night, bodies concentrate indoors. Cooking intensifies. People settle closer together. Doors or entrance coverings remain closed more consistently. The dwelling enters its most thermally efficient phase precisely when outside temperatures often begin falling. Winter social life and winter physics overlap. You hear laughter from somewhere near the hearth. It is brief and quiet. The sound reminds you that a winter house is not simply a survival capsule. People tell stories here. They teach children. They repair clothing. They prepare tools. They argue occasionally, because insulation apparently cannot prevent that. They share meals and exchange news. Long winter evenings create social time as well as thermal challenges. A communal shelter protects relationships alongside bodies. This matters because cooperation itself improves survival. Fuel gathering requires effort. Roof maintenance requires effort. Food preparation requires effort. Childcare requires effort. Water may need to be carried. Snow can obstruct entrances. Clothing tears. Footwear wears out. When labour is shared, no single person must perform every task. A household can continue functioning when someone is exhausted, injured, very young, elderly, or temporarily unable to contribute in the same way. Warmth is therefore partly social resilience. The building protects people. People keep the building working. One cannot be separated cleanly from the other. Consider the fire. Someone must notice when it declines. During severe weather, another person may add fuel before sleeping. Someone else has already helped gather that fuel. The person cooking dinner uses the same heat source. Later, glowing coals may help restart the morning fire. A single hearth becomes a shared investment. This efficiency appears repeatedly in communal architecture. Several people can benefit from one fire instead of maintaining several separate ones. One roof protects multiple sleepers. One repaired entrance reduces drafts for everyone. Shared resources become thermally useful resources. There is a quirky truth hidden here. A crowded historical house might occasionally be warmer precisely because it was crowded. Modern people often dream about having more space. Winter physics occasionally prefers relatives. Perhaps not infinitely many relatives. There are limits to every insulation strategy. More occupants also mean more moisture from breathing. Cooking for larger households releases additional water vapor. Smoke management becomes more demanding. Space can become uncomfortable. Illness can spread more readily where people live close together. Communal warmth brings trade-offs. Again, the solution is balance. Ventilation must remove moisture and smoke without sacrificing excessive heat. Sleeping arrangements must use available space efficiently. Household routines must prevent people from blocking entrances or crowding dangerous areas around the fire. Social knowledge regulates the interior as surely as architectural features do. You notice disorganization gradually. People do not sit randomly. Sleeping areas belong to particular household members or family groups. Stored possessions occupy established places. Work happens where light and warmth make sense. Children learn which spaces are safe. The fire has boundaries even without modern barriers. Movement follows familiar paths. An organized interior reduces accidents and makes limited space function better. Historians still debate many details of household size and seasonal occupancy for particular indigenous settlements. Archaeological structures provide dimensions, hearth locations, storage features, and post patterns. Those clues allow researchers to estimate how spaces might have functioned, but determining exactly how many people slept inside a particular house during one winter can be difficult. Household composition changes. Visitors arrive. Marriages alter family groups. Children are born. People die or relocate. Seasonal activities change occupancy. Later, historical descriptions offer snapshots rather than permanent rules. The safest conclusion is that household organization was dynamic. A house could contain different numbers of people across its lifespan. That changing occupancy would influence warmth too. More bodies raise internal heat production. Fewer bodies place greater demands on fire and personal insulation. The building performs differently as the household changes. You can feel this when several people leave briefly. The entrance opens. Cold air enters near the floor. Then the covering closes. For a while, the interior feels less settled. When everyone returns, bodies cluster around the hearth again. The difference is subtle. Over hours, subtle differences accumulate. Now someone begins preparing the evening meal. The fire brightens. A vessel warms. Steam rises. The smell of food spreads through the dwelling. And people naturally gather closer. Cooking becomes a thermal event. The fire releases more heat. Warm food enters human bodies. Digestion and metabolism continue producing energy afterward. The social act of eating therefore supports physical warmth at several levels. This does not mean every winter meal was plentiful. Food insecurity could become a serious danger. Hunting might fail. Stored crops could spoil. Weather could restrict movement. Conflict or displacement could disrupt supplies. Historical communities were resilient, but they were never invulnerable. A well-designed house cannot manufacture calories. That limitation matters. Body heat depends upon energy. When food becomes scarce, maintaining warmth becomes harder. The person sitting comfortably beside you tonight relies upon months of earlier work. Fields were planted. Plants were gathered. Animals were hunted. Food was dried. Containers were prepared. Storage places were protected. Trade relationships may have brought additional resources. Winter warmth begins long before winter. This is another reason community matters. Food can sometimes be shared. Knowledge about hunting grounds can circulate. Relatives can support one another during difficult periods. A household with damaged shelter may receive help from neighbors. A village can mobilize labor after storms. Social networks become invisible infrastructure. They do not appear in the wall, yet they help keep the wall standing. You listen as an older person speaks softly near the fire. Children remain nearby. Perhaps practical knowledge passes during moments exactly like this. Where should fuel be stored? How should a covering be repaired? What does changing wind mean? Which snow conditions make travel dangerous? When should bedding be dried? A lesson does not always sound like a lesson. Sometimes it is simply a story told while hands remain busy. Knowledge enters memory almost unnoticed. Generations repeat the process. This transmission may be one of the most important winter technologies of all. A shelter can be destroyed. Knowledge allows another to be built. A robe can wear out. Knowledge allows another to be prepared. A storm can scatter a camp. Knowledge helps people choose the next protected location. Physical objects survive for years. Cultural knowledge can survive centuries. The room grows quieter as the meal approaches. You notice how close everyone has moved toward the warm center. No instruction was necessary. People naturally arrange themselves according to heat, light, work, and companionship. The fire illuminates faces. Behind them, cooler darkness fills the edges of the dwelling. That is perfectly fine. Nobody needs to warm an empty corner. The useful warmth remains where life is concentrated. Your earlier question now seems almost backward. Why did these houses not freeze? Some certainly became very cold. The more revealing question is how people remained warm enough inside them. The answer keeps expanding. Landscape protects the structure. Walls slow heat loss. Fire provides radiant warmth. Bedding protects sleepers. Clothing surrounds bodies. Families share heat and labor. Yet every one of those warm bodies requires fuel of another kind. The smell rising from the cooking vessel reminds you of it. Winter survival ultimately reaches the stomach. As bowls begin passing around the fire, you realize that tonight's meal is not merely dinner. It is tomorrow's body heat. You accept a warm bowl near the fire, and steam rises gently toward your face. The smell reaches you before the first taste. Something rich has been simmering over the hearth. Combining stored ingredients with precious fuel and several hours of patient attention, Your cold hands appreciate the bowl almost as much as your stomach does. Winter food is warmth in waiting. The connection is straightforward. Your body requires energy to maintain its internal temperature, circulate blood, move muscles, repair tissue, and continue countless processes while you sleep. Much of that energy ultimately comes from food. During cold weather, maintaining body temperature can increase energy demands, especially when people spend substantial time outdoors or perform heavy physical work. Shelter reduces those demands. Clothing reduces them further. Food supplies what remains. This means winter preparation begins during seasons when the landscape looks nothing like it does tonight. Imagine returning to the Missouri River villages during late summer. Fields spread around the settlement, among agricultural peoples such as the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara. Crops including corn, beans, squash, and sunflowers formed important parts of subsistence. These foods could be prepared and stored in ways that carried summer energy into winter. Drying is particularly useful. Removing moisture slows many forms of spoilage and reduces weight. Corn can wait quietly for months when stored under suitable conditions. Beans become compact packages of energy and nutrients. Squash can be dried for later use. Sunflower seeds provide valuable fat. The winter household becomes partly a warehouse of earlier sunlight. Plants captured solar energy during the growing season. People harvested them. Now, during a freezing night, that energy returns through your meal. There is something pleasantly circular about it. The sun that warmed a field months ago is helping warm your hands today. Agriculture was only one strategy. Across the continent, indigenous peoples relied upon enormously diverse combinations of hunting, fishing, gathering, farming, trade, and seasonal movement. Northern communities adapted to very different food landscapes from southwestern farmers. Coastal peoples could depend heavily upon marine resources. Woodland communities combined cultivated crops with hunting, fishing, and gathered foods according to region and period. Plains peoples relied upon bison to varying degrees alongside other resources. There was no universal winter menu. There was, however, a universal problem. Food must remain available when winter reduces what can be gathered fresh. Preservation solves part of that problem. Meat can be dried. Fish can be dried or smoked in appropriate environments and traditions. Plant foods can be dehydrated. Seeds and nuts can be stored. Fats can be preserved with care. Some foods can remain inside protected storage pits or containers. Different communities develop techniques suited to local climate, ingredients, and seasonal patterns. You chew slowly. The warmth in your mouth is temporary. The calories matter longer. Fat is especially valuable because it contains more energy per unit of weight than carbohydrates or protein for people performing strenuous winter work. Energy-dense foods can therefore be extremely useful. This does not mean historical diets were simply enormous quantities of fat. Availability varied. Nutritional patterns were complex, but obtaining sufficient dietary fat could become important in environments where lean meat dominated certain seasons. Hunters understood animals beyond simple categories of meat. Different tissues had different uses and values. One famous food associated with several indigenous cultures of the plains and northern regions is commonly called pemmican in English. Broadly speaking, forms of this preserved food combined dried, pulverized meat with rendered fat, sometimes with additional ingredients depending upon tradition and circumstance. Properly prepared, it could be energy-dense, portable, and relatively durable. That combination made it valuable for travel. A small amount could carry substantial calories. Later fur trade economies made some forms of pemmican particularly important as commercial provisions. Yet its history is older than those colonial trading systems. Portable preserved food fits naturally into mobile winter life. You do not want your emergency provisions requiring an elaborate kitchen every time snow begins falling. A quirky advantage of dried food is that it can look rather unimpressive. Fresh abundance disappears. Water has been removed. Colors may become muted. Textures change. Then you remember that appearance is not the primary winter objective. A glamorous meal that spoils before January is less useful than an ugly one that waits patiently until February. Winter has practical standards. Storage itself becomes another technology. Food must be protected from moisture, animals, insects, theft, and temperature fluctuations. Some indigenous communities used underground storage pits, especially where agricultural surpluses needed preservation. A pit can benefit from the same thermal stability you noticed in Earth architecture. Below the surface, temperatures change more slowly. The ground buffers extremes, but underground storage introduces risks too. Moisture can spoil food. Rodents may discover supplies. Flooding can become disastrous. Containers and coverings must therefore be carefully arranged. A storage pit is not simply a hole containing dinner. It is controlled space. Historical descriptions of Missouri River villages mention sophisticated food storage practices. While archaeological sites preserve many storage features, researchers can sometimes recover charred corn, seeds, or other plant remains. Those fragments reveal what people cultivated and consumed. Animal bones add evidence about hunting. Residues can provide further clues, yet historians still debate exact seasonal proportions within many historical diets. Archaeological preservation favors some foods over others. A charred seed survives better than a bowl of soup. Soft plant tissues disappear. Prepared foods leave ambiguous traces. Trade moves ingredients away from their original environments. Even abundant evidence therefore produces incomplete menus. You should imagine variation rather than a fixed daily meal. Some winters were generous. Others were difficult. One year might produce excellent crops. Another could bring drought, pests, early frost, flooding, or conflict. Hunting success changed too. Bison movements could alter access to meat. Fishing conditions varied. Stored supplies might become damaged. Food security was never guaranteed. This uncertainty makes preservation more important. When resources are abundant, you prepare for periods when they are not. The habit requires discipline. Eating everything immediately feels rewarding. Drying part of it for a cold month requires imagination. You must picture your future hungry self. That person will be extremely grateful. Food preservation is therefore another way of slowing time. Earth walls slow temperature change. Bedding slows heat loss. Drying slows spoilage. Storage carries abundance forward. Traditional winter systems repeatedly transform sudden environmental changes into gradual ones. Slow the cold. Slow the decay. Slow the loss. Give yourself time. You take another mouthful. The hearth warms your face while the food warms you differently. A hot meal can provide immediate comfort, especially after exposure. Warm liquids may help someone feel restored, but the body's longer thermal needs depend upon calories rather than simply food temperature. A cold, energy-rich meal still contains usable fuel. A hot bowl containing almost no calories cannot sustain hard winter work for long. The distinction is useful. Feeling warm and producing warmth are related but different. Digestion itself also generates some heat as the body processes food. This thermic effect varies with nutrients. More broadly, a well-fed body has the energy required to maintain normal heat production. An underfed person faces greater difficulty. Now consider the labor required to obtain that bowl. Someone planted or hunted, someone harvested, someone processed, someone preserved, someone carried, someone stored, someone gathered the firewood, someone prepared the meal. The warmth reaching your stomach is the final stage of a long chain. Winter survival depends upon that chain remaining unbroken. Community helps again. Tasks can be distributed according to age, skill, gender roles, cultural practices, and circumstances. Knowledge determines when plants should be harvested. Hunters understand seasonal animal behavior. People preparing foods know how dry something must become before storage. Storage specialists recognize signs of moisture or spoilage. Children learn through participation. Food security is accumulated expertise. There is another relationship between meals and the house itself. Cooking releases heat into the interior. A hearth already needed for food can warm nearby occupants simultaneously. Steam increases humidity, which may feel pleasant in extremely dry air, but creates moisture management challenges in enclosed shelters. Smoke must escape. Ventilation carries some heat away. Once more, every advantage creates another requirement. The household adjusts. Perhaps an opening is widened briefly. Perhaps fuel is rearranged. Perhaps wet materials are moved. No single action is complicated. Together they form environmental management. You finish the bowl and notice your fingers feel warmer now. Part of that comes from sitting near the fire. Part comes from holding the warm vessel. Part comes from the clothing around you. Soon, metabolic processes will make use of the food. Several layers of warmth overlap again. Outside, none of this is visible. A traveller might see smoke rising from a roof and assume the fire alone explains survival. The fire is only one participant. The meal beside it matters just as much. You imagine what happens during a severe storm lasting several days. Travel becomes difficult. Hunting may become unsafe. Fuel gathering becomes unpleasant. A household with stored food can remain protected while conditions worsen outside. That ability reduces exposure. You do not need to leave the shelter merely because dinner has vanished. Stored provisions effectively allow the house to remain occupied. They extend the shelter's usefulness through time. Fuel storage does the same. A warm dwelling without firewood becomes less effective. A stocked pantry without shelter becomes vulnerable. Preparation links them. Winter resilience comes from redundancy. If the fire weakens, clothing helps. If outdoor hunting becomes impossible, stored food helps. If temperatures fall suddenly, bedding helps. If wind strengthens, the building shell helps. Multiple systems prevent one failure from becoming immediately catastrophic. You place the empty bowl aside. Around you, the household becomes quieter. The meal has restored energy, and several people begin preparing for another cold night. Someone checks the entrance. Another person handles a section of covering near the wall. Outside, snow has begun gathering again. Wind pushes it against one side of the structure. That sound brings your attention back to the shell around you. Food can fuel the body. Fire can warm the interior, but both advantages disappear quickly if wind and moisture penetrate the dwelling. The next challenge is therefore defensive. You must keep snow where it belongs. You must guide water away. And above all, you must stop the winter wind from finding the small weaknesses in your walls. You hear the wind before you feel anything else. It presses against the outer covering, retreats briefly, then returns with enough force to send loose snow scraping across the structure. Inside, the fire continues burning. Your bedding remains dry. The meal has left a comfortable warmth in your stomach. Yet one poorly sealed opening could begin undoing those advantages. Winter is very good at finding gaps. A narrow draft seems harmless when you first notice it against your ankle. Leave it unchecked for several hours, however. And moving air continually replaces warmer interior air with colder air from outside. The fire must then work harder. Fuel disappears faster. People become less comfortable. Stopping unwanted airflow is therefore one of the simplest ways to conserve warmth. You move toward the wall. A hand passes slowly along its lower edge until a faint stream of cold air becomes noticeable. The repair may require only a small adjustment. A covering is repositioned. Loose material fills the opening. Earth, vegetation, hide, bark, mats, or other locally appropriate materials can help close vulnerable places depending upon the dwelling. The draft weakens. Nothing dramatic has happened. That is precisely the point. Good winter maintenance often looks boring. A repaired gap does not make an exciting legend. It may save more fuel than a heroic hour of chopping wood. Different house types develop different weaknesses. A portable hide dwelling can allow wind beneath its lower covering when conditions change. A bark-covered structure may develop openings as panels shift or weather. Earth and plaster can crack. An earth lodge roof may suffer erosion. Snow and rain test every seam. The inhabitants must know where problems usually appear. That knowledge comes from repetition. You remember where last winter's leak formed. You notice which side receives the strongest storms. You recognize the sound of loose material. You repair trouble before the weather becomes severe. Maintenance becomes memory translated into action. Entrances deserve particular attention because people must pass through them repeatedly. Every doorway is an intentional hole in your insulation. A large open entrance allows wind to travel directly into occupied space. Smaller openings reduce that exposure. Coverings can close entrances when they are not being used. Some substantial structures incorporate entrance passages that create additional separation from outdoor conditions. The idea is wonderfully straightforward. Make cold air travel farther. If the wind cannot move directly from the landscape to your sleeping place, much of its force is lost. Modern vestibules exploit a related principle. Historical builders needed no modern terminology to recognize that two barriers can outperform one. You step toward the entrance as someone returns from outside. The covering lifts. A burst of cold air slips across the floor. Snow crystals scatter inward. Then the opening closes again. Within moments, conditions begin settling. You brush away the snow before it melts. That small action matters. Snow seems dry when frozen, but once it enters a warmer interior, it becomes water. Water can soak floor materials, bedding, clothing, and structural layers. A few crystals cause little concern. Repeated accumulation creates a damp problem. Moisture may be more dangerous to insulation than cold air itself. Dry fibrous materials trap air. Wet them, and their performance changes. Damp hides become unpleasant. Wet footwear chills feet. Moist plant bedding can lose insulating value. Wood exposed repeatedly to moisture can decay. Earthen surfaces may soften or erode. Keeping the interior dry therefore becomes a major winter task. Roof design helps. A steep or rounded surface encourages precipitation to move away instead of remaining in one place. Tipi coverings shed rain and snow through their sloping geometry. Longhouse roofs similarly avoid broad flat surfaces where heavy snow might accumulate indefinitely. Earth lodges have different structural demands because their roofs already carry substantial mass. Snow loading must be watched carefully. The weight can become enormous. A single fluffy snowflake seems harmless. A roof covered by millions of them develops a different personality. Wet snow is especially heavy. Experienced households therefore pay attention to accumulation, roof condition, and structural supports. You might clear troublesome snow when necessary, yet some snow around the lower exterior can also reduce wind penetration. This creates another familiar contradiction. Snow is insulation and weight. It is a wind barrier and a moisture source. It can protect one part of a dwelling while threatening another. There is no rule saying snow is simply good or bad. You use its advantages while managing its risks. One quirky winter practice across many cold environments is using loose snow deliberately around exposed lower edges to reduce drafts. Exactly how often particular indigenous households did this varied, and evidence is not equally strong for every dwelling tradition. Still, the physical principle is sound. Snow contains trapped air. A stable bank can interrupt wind, but blocking ventilation accidentally would create serious problems, especially around structures containing fires. Never solve one problem by forgetting the others. That could serve as winter's unofficial motto. You listen to the roof. Snow produces a soft brushing sound rather than the hard tapping of rain. The sound is almost soothing. Then a heavier clump slides away. Someone glances upward. No alarm follows. The structure is being monitored even during ordinary conversation. This constant awareness is another form of technology. The inhabitants do not need electronic sensors. They have ears. A new creak matters. A different draft matters. The smell of damp material matters. Smoke behaving strangely matters. Sensory awareness allows quick responses. Your house talks continuously if you know its language. Historians still face uncertainty about many temporary winter modifications, because such repairs leave almost no archaeological trace. A permanent post hole may survive for centuries. A handful of grass stuffed into a draft disappears. A hide hung temporarily across an entrance disappears. Snowbanking obviously disappears. An extra winter mat against a wall may decay completely. Archaeologists can therefore reconstruct the major architecture more confidently than these seasonal details. This matters because small adjustments can produce large changes in comfort. The surviving structure is only the skeleton. Daily maintenance supplied the living skin. Written accounts sometimes preserve glimpses of these practices, but observers rarely recorded every household adjustment. Why would they? Someone plugging a draft does not appear historically important until you ask how people survived the winter. Then it becomes fascinating. You move toward another section of wall. Your fingertips find coolness but no moving air. That is good. A cold surface is not necessarily a failure. The goal is not making every wall warm. The goal is reducing heat transfer enough that clothing, bedding, people, and fire can maintain tolerable conditions. Drafts disrupt that balance rapidly. Moisture disrupts it more slowly. Both require attention. Wind direction can change during a storm. A wall protected in the afternoon may become exposed after midnight. Portable shelters can sometimes be reconfigured in response. Smoke openings may need adjustment. Entrance coverings may be secured differently. In permanent structures, external windbreaks, surrounding buildings, vegetation, and terrain provide more consistent protection. You remember the ridge from your second winter evening. Site selection is returning to the story. A house placed behind natural shelter needs fewer repairs than one facing every storm directly. The first architectural decision continues influencing every later one. Nothing exists independently. Even surrounding houses can help. In compact settlements, neighbouring structures interrupt wind before it reaches others. Walls create protected pockets. Snow accumulates differently between buildings. Paths become sheltered in places. The village modifies its own microclimate. A lone dwelling experiences the landscape directly. A cluster changes the flow of air. This effect varies with settlement form, but the principle is familiar. Community becomes physical shelter once again. You step outside briefly to understand the difference. The wind hits immediately. Snow stings your face. Your clothing blocks most of it, yet exposed skin begins cooling within seconds. You turn your back instinctively. On the sheltered side of the dwelling, conditions improve. The same air temperature feels less severe because the wind has weakened. Move between two structures, and another protected pocket appears. Walk toward an exposed edge, and the full force returns. Winter exists in tiny climates. A few steps can matter. You return indoors. The sudden calm feels luxurious. Snow on your footwear is removed before you settle near the fire. Wet outer materials are positioned where they can dry safely. Not too close. A spark landing on dry hide or plant fibers could create an entirely different bedtime story. The fire warms damp surfaces gradually. Ventilation carries moisture away. Everyone continues managing the environment without appearing especially concerned. The calm competence comes from familiarity. A storm is dangerous, but it is not mysterious. People know what to inspect. Fuel is available. Food has been stored. Clothing is maintained. Bedding remains dry. The roof is watched. The entrance is protected. Winter becomes a series of manageable tasks rather than one overwhelming enemy. Of course, storms could exceed expectations. A prolonged blizzard might isolate a settlement. Exceptional snowfall could damage structures. Fuel could run low. Unexpected thawing and refreezing might create dangerous conditions. Traditional knowledge reduced risk. It never removed uncertainty. That distinction protects the story from romantic fantasy. Indigenous communities survived difficult winters through expertise, preparation, cooperation, and adaptation. They did not possess supernatural immunity to cold. The storm outside could still kill. That is precisely why every small defensive measure mattered. You settle beside the hearth again. The repaired draft is gone. Your bedding remains dry. Wind continues pushing against the structure, but it now sounds distant. The house has successfully separated two environments. Outside, moving snow. Inside, controlled air. That difference is the foundation of winter shelter. Yet the methods producing it vary enormously across North America. You have travelled through earth lodges, tipis, longhouses, and pueblo rooms. But these examples represent only part of a much larger architectural world. Farther north, south, east, and west. Different peoples solved winter according to different landscapes. There was never one Native American winter house. There were hundreds of traditions, and to understand their ingenuity properly, you must now place them side by side without pretending they were all the same. You stand upon a high ridge in your imagination, looking across an entire continent instead of a single village. The snowy forest stretches eastward. The broad plains disappear beneath distant clouds. Far beyond them, Deserts glow softly beneath winter sunlight. Mountains rise in layered blue silhouettes, while frozen rivers wind through valleys that have supported human life for thousands of years. From this height, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. There was never a single Native American winter house. There were hundreds of architectural traditions, each responding to a particular landscape, climate, way of life, and cultural identity. The farther you travel, the more clearly you see that the environment asks different questions in different places. Communities answered them differently. That diversity is perhaps the greatest lesson of all. You begin in the northeastern forest once more. Heavy snowfall is common. Forests provide abundant timber and bark. Agriculture supports permanent villages in many areas. Extended families live together beneath long roofs. Several fires warm one communal interior. The building becomes a social landscape as much as a physical one. Now your journey continues westward. The forests gradually thin. Grasslands replace dense woodland. Mobility becomes increasingly important for many plains peoples following seasonal resources. A permanent timber and earth structure would become impractical for communities needing to move. Portable shelters therefore evolve remarkable sophistication. Hide coverings, carefully arranged poles, adjustable smoke openings, interior liners, thoughtful ventilation. Everything serves movement without abandoning winter protection. Farther south and west, the landscape changes again. Stone, clay, and earth become prominent building materials. Sunlight grows stronger. Winter nights remain cold, but clear skies provide daytime solar energy that thick walls can store. Compact room blocks share walls. Settlements climb mesas or occupy valleys according to water. Farming, defense, and tradition. Thermal mass becomes one of the architect's greatest allies. Travel north again. Conditions become harsher. Longer winters, shorter growing seasons, deeper snow, different animals, different vegetation, different seasonal rhythms. Community living in subarctic environments develop still other forms of shelter and clothing suited to those conditions. Some groups built winter houses partly below ground. Others relied upon carefully insulated skin or bark structures according to region, available resources, and seasonal movement. Again, there is no universal design, only local wisdom. The landscape becomes your greatest teacher. It quietly tells every builder what will and will not succeed. A house that works beautifully in Arizona may fail spectacularly beside the Great Lakes. An earth lodge perfect for a settled agricultural village becomes an impossible burden for highly mobile hunters. Likewise, a lightweight portable dwelling would not necessarily serve the needs of a large farming settlement expecting to remain in one place for generations. Architecture follows life. Life follows the land. You notice something else. Many of these buildings share no obvious visual resemblance. One is round, another is long, another appears almost square. One uses bark, another uses earth, another depends upon hides. Yet beneath those differences, familiar principles keep reappearing. Block the wind, reduce unnecessary space, trap still air, protect bedding, manage smoke, control moisture, store food, share warmth, use local materials wisely. The details change, the ideas remain remarkably consistent. That consistency says something important about human problem solving. People separated by enormous distances often discover similar physical principles because the natural world behaves consistently. Cold air still sinks, warm air still rises, dry insulation still works better than wet insulation. A family still produces body heat. The laws of nature create common challenges. Culture shapes unique solutions. You begin appreciating how misleading simple comparisons can become. Modern discussions sometimes ask which indigenous house was the warmest. The question itself misses the point. Warmest where? Warmest during which season? Warmest for a farming village? Warmest for travellers? Warmest considering available fuel? Warmest after 2 days of heavy snow? Architecture cannot be judged outside its intended environment. Imagine comparing a fishing boat with a mountain cabin. Each would perform terribly at the other's job. No sensible builder expects otherwise. Winter houses deserve the same fairness. A plains tipi should not be criticised because it cannot perform exactly like an earth lodge. It was never designed for that purpose. Likewise, a permanent earth lodge cannot easily accompany a migrating hunting community across vast grasslands. Every structure reflects priorities. Every priority reflects a way of life. Historians increasingly emphasize this point. Older writings sometimes ranked indigenous architecture according to European assumptions about permanence, size, or appearance. Today, many scholars instead examine how successfully buildings met the needs of the communities who created them. That shift matters. Effectiveness should be measured within cultural and environmental context, not against unrelated expectations. Researchers continue debating countless architectural details because North America contained extraordinary diversity long before Europeans arrived. Different nations exchanged ideas through trade. Some techniques spread, others remained strongly regional. Climate itself changed over centuries. Communities migrated. Resources shifted. Conflict altered settlement patterns. Trade introduced new materials. Colonization transformed entire landscapes. A winter dwelling described in the 18th century may differ significantly from one used by the same nation centuries earlier. History keeps moving. Even traditions adapt. This flexibility may be one of indigenous architecture's greatest strengths. Builders observed. Builders experimented. Builders modified familiar designs when circumstances required. They did not worship frozen blueprints. Knowledge remained alive because people remained alive. You walk through several imagined settlements in quick succession. In one, smoke rises from rounded earth lodges surrounded by fields resting beneath snow. In another, longhouses stretch between leafless hardwood trees while several hearths glow inside. Farther west, hide-covered tipis stand in carefully chosen positions along a sheltered river valley. Beyond mountains, thick earthen pueblo walls collect the final warmth of the afternoon sun. Different worlds, different winters, different answers. Yet each household performs the same quiet evening rituals. Fuel is checked, food is prepared, clothing dries, children settle near relatives. The fire receives another piece of wood. Someone examines the entrance before darkness deepens. These ordinary actions unite places separated by thousands of miles. Survival is often repetitive. You smile slightly at another realization. None of these people would likely describe themselves as participating in a grand experiment in thermal engineering. They were simply living. The physics becomes visible because you are looking backward with modern curiosity. For them, the knowledge belonged to everyday experience. A child learned where to sleep because that place was warmer. An elder repaired a draft because drafts were unpleasant. A builder selected certain materials because they had always worked well. Complex understanding often hides inside ordinary habits. That is one reason archaeology can seem mysterious. Researchers uncover walls. The people who built those walls carried far more knowledge in their memories than they left in the ground. You pause beside a frozen stream crossing the imagined continent. The water continues moving beneath thick ice. It reminds you of another theme running quietly beneath this entire journey. Adaptation. Water adapts by flowing around obstacles. People adapt by learning from landscapes. Communities adapt by refining traditions across generations. No winter house remains successful forever without maintenance, observation, and change. Every year taught another lesson. Some winters arrived early. Others stayed unusually dry. Storms varied. Animal population shifted. Fuel availability changed. Knowledge accumulated because people paid attention. There is a gentle humility in that approach. Rather than attempting to dominate winter completely, indigenous builders usually worked with its realities. Earth becomes insulation because Earth already exists. Sunlight becomes stored warmth because sunlight already arrives. Snow becomes a windbreak because snow already falls. The environment supplies possibilities. Human intelligence arranges them. You leave the ridge and descend toward another settlement. Along the way, you remember something from the beginning of this story. The dramatic title claimed these houses never froze. By now, that sentence feels much less interesting than the truth. Many of these homes certainly became cold. Some winters overwhelmed even the best preparations. People suffered. Some died during exceptionally severe conditions. History should not erase hardships simply to create admiration. The achievement lies elsewhere. Communities repeatedly built homes capable of making deadly environments survivable using local materials, accumulated knowledge, and extraordinary practical skill. That accomplishment requires no exaggeration. Reality is impressive enough. As evening settles again, smoke rises from dozens of different houses across your imagined continent. Each roof tells a different story. Each wall reflects a different landscape. Each family prepares for another cold night in its own way. Tomorrow, however, strangers will arrive. They will come from across an ocean carrying different architectural assumptions. Many will see these homes without truly understanding why they work. Some will underestimate them completely, and those misunderstandings will linger for centuries. You remain on the edge of the settlement as unfamiliar visitors approach from the distance. They arrive carrying their own expectations about what a proper house should look like. Many come from regions of Europe where stone cottages, timber-framed houses, and brick buildings define ideas of permanence and comfort. When they first encounter indigenous homes, they often compare them to the architecture they already know. That comparison is understandable. It is also incomplete. People usually judge unfamiliar things by familiar standards. The difficulty begins when those first impressions become permanent conclusions. Imagine yourself standing beside one of these newcomers. The winter air bites at your face while smoke rises from a nearby dwelling. The visitor glances at the bark walls of a longhouse and quietly wonders how anyone could possibly stay warm inside. Another visitor sees a teepee and assumes that a portable home must automatically be uncomfortable. Someone else looks at an earth lodge and notices only its earthen exterior without appreciating the carefully engineered layers hidden beneath the soil. The buildings appear simple. Their intelligence remains invisible. That invisibility shapes history. Many early European accounts describe indigenous homes with genuine curiosity. Others are respectful. Some provide remarkably valuable observations that historians continue using today. Yet many descriptions also contain misunderstandings, cultural bias, or incomplete information. A traveller spending one afternoon in a village rarely understands knowledge accumulated across centuries. You cannot learn an entire winter tradition between breakfast and supper. One common misunderstanding involved comfort itself. European visitors often expected interiors to resemble the heated houses they already knew. Instead, they encountered rooms where temperatures varied from one area to another. Smoke drifted beneath roof openings. People remained dressed in substantial winter clothing indoors. Sleeping arrangements emphasized bedding rather than uniformly heated rooms. From one perspective, the houses seemed primitive. From another, they were carefully adapted to local realities. Both observers occupied the same room. They noticed different things. This reminds you that architecture is experienced through expectation. Someone accustomed to stone fireplaces and glass windows evaluates warmth differently from someone raised inside bark walls with layered bedding and fur robes. Neither experience is imaginary. Each reflects different habits. There is another subtle problem. European observers often admired permanence. Large stone buildings suggested wealth, authority, and civilization according to many traditions familiar to them. Portable architecture therefore appeared temporary and less impressive. Yet mobility can be a tremendous advantage. A teepee exists because its owners need a house that travels. Judging it against an immovable stone cottage misunderstands its purpose completely. It is rather like criticizing a canoe because it lacks wheels. The object was never intended to perform that task. Likewise, some permanent indigenous villages impressed European observers precisely because they challenged stereotypes. Missouri River Earth Lodge towns astonished visitors with their substantial construction, agriculture, and organized layouts. Large Pueblo settlements inspired similar reactions. Longhouses stretching through northeastern forests demonstrated another kind of architectural ambition. The diversity itself often surprised outsiders. Many arrived expecting one type of native dwelling. Instead, they discovered an entire continent of different building traditions. You smile gently at the thought. The continent refused to cooperate with simple categories. It still does. You walk toward an earth lodge. The thick roof is dusted with fresh snow. A newcomer might see only dirt. You now recognize thermal mass, carefully placed timbers, insulating vegetation, drainage, and countless hours of skilled labor. Knowledge changes what the eye perceives. The same transformation occurs beside a teepee. Someone unfamiliar may notice only animal hides stretched over poles. You notice adjustable ventilation, aerodynamic design, portability, layered airflow, and remarkable engineering suited to mobile life. The building has not changed. You have. Historians spend much of their professional lives attempting similar transformations. Archaeologists uncover structural remains. Ethnographers examine historical descriptions. Indigenous communities preserve oral traditions and practical knowledge. Architectural historians compare construction methods. Environmental scientists study climate. Together, these different perspectives help reconstruct winter life more accurately. Even so, certainty remains elusive. Researchers still debate how some historical buildings were repaired seasonally, how frequently coverings were replaced, how household sizes changed over time, and how specific construction techniques differed between neighboring communities. The farther back you travel, the fewer written descriptions survive. Organic materials decay. Oral knowledge may have been interrupted by disease, forced displacement, warfare, assimilation policies, and other devastating consequences of colonization. Every missing voice leaves another question. That uncertainty deserves respect rather than frustration. History sometimes whispers instead of shouting. Listen carefully enough, and whispers become meaningful. Another misunderstanding involved smoke. Many European observers complained about smoky interiors. They were not imagining it. Some indigenous dwellings could indeed become smoky, particularly when ventilation conditions changed. But those observations often stopped there. Less attention was given to why smoke existed, how fires were managed, how occupants adjusted openings, or why reducing ventilation too much would have trapped dangerous gases. The complaint was accurate. The explanation was incomplete. Good historical understanding asks another question. Why did people continue using these designs? The answer cannot simply be ignorance. Communities lived in these environments for generations. If a design repeatedly failed, it would have been abandoned or modified. Instead, many forms persisted because they balanced competing needs remarkably well. Warmth, ventilation, mobility, available materials, labor, food storage, family organization. Every successful house negotiated those priorities. No perfect solution existed, only practical ones. You notice another difference between European and indigenous architectural traditions. Many European houses increasingly separated activities into specialized rooms, cooking in one place, sleeping in another, storage elsewhere. Indigenous winter dwellings often combined several activities within shared spaces. Cooking, conversation, repair work, teaching, eating, and sleeping occurred within overlapping thermal zones. From a modern perspective, this might appear crowded. From an energy perspective, it is highly efficient. Heat stays where people actually live. Empty rooms receive no unnecessary firewood. Again, context changes judgment. One quirky historical irony deserves a quiet smile. Today, architects designing energy-efficient buildings often praise concepts such as passive solar heating, thermal mass, compact floor plans, shared walls, natural ventilation, and climate-responsive construction. You have spent the evening watching indigenous builders employ versions of those same principles centuries earlier. The terminology is modern. The wisdom is not. Knowledge does not require concrete or electricity before becoming intelligent. Sometimes it requires only careful observation repeated over many generations. Outside, the snow continues falling. You run your hand across a wall that has been standing against winter longer than any visitor has been alive. The surface feels cool. It does not feel defeated. Nearby, a child carries another armful of fuel toward the hearth. Someone checks the entrance covering. Another person shakes snow from a row before stepping inside. Daily maintenance continues without ceremony. No one announces that remarkable engineering is taking place. Life simply goes on. This ordinary quality may explain why Indigenous architecture remained misunderstood for so long. Great achievements often hide inside routine. People rarely pause to admire a doorway that blocks a draft. They simply appreciate not feeling cold. The same applies to a well-positioned village, carefully prepared bedding, or thoughtfully layered clothing. Excellence becomes invisible once it works consistently. You glance once more toward the imagined newcomers. Some eventually learn. They observe more carefully. They adopt Indigenous winter clothing. They borrow construction ideas. They depend upon native guides for survival during harsh seasons. Others never abandon their original assumptions. History records examples of both. Learning requires humility. Sometimes the landscape teaches everyone equally. A severe winter pays little attention to cultural pride. It rewards whatever methods actually work. You remember your first evening beneath a snow-filled sky. The question seems simple. How did these houses never freeze? Now you know the question itself was misleading. The houses were not magical. They could become cold. Their occupants still faced danger. Storms still tested every preparation. The real achievement was creating environments where families could continue living, sleeping, cooking, teaching, repairing, laughing, and waiting for spring despite conditions that might otherwise become fatal. That achievement belongs not to one remarkable invention, but to countless practical decisions. As darkness deepens outside, those decisions surround you. The wall blocks the wind. The bedding protects the sleeper. The fire warms the room. The clothing surrounds the body. The meal fuels tomorrow. The family shares labour. The village shares knowledge. Every layer supports the next. Only one question remains. After everything you have seen, what is the single lesson connecting every one of these winter homes? The answer is quieter than you might expect. It is waiting beside the last glowing embers of the fire. You sit quietly beside the final glowing embers, listening as the storm slowly loses its strength outside. The wind that sounded so fierce a few hours ago has settled into a softer whisper. Snow still falls. It simply falls with less urgency. Inside the dwelling, no one rushes. There is confidence in the calm rhythm of the household. But it is not the confidence of people who believe winter has been conquered. It is the confidence of people who have prepared. Preparation is perhaps the greatest winter technology of all. Every shelter you have visited has shared that lesson. No family waited until the first blizzard to begin gathering fuel. No skilled builder started thinking about roof repairs after snow already filled the house. No experienced hunter planned next month's food during tomorrow's hunger. Winter rewards those who begin working long before winter arrives. You look around the room once more. Firewood is stacked where it can remain reasonably dry. Bedding has been aired and protected. Food occupies carefully chosen storage places. Clothing hangs where moisture can gradually disappear. Tools are ready should repairs become necessary. Nothing appears dramatic, yet every object represents foresight. This is one reason modern people sometimes underestimate historical survival. The exciting moment is rarely the most important one. The spectacular snowstorm captures attention. The quiet afternoon spent repairing a small crack in late autumn prevents disaster months later. Success often becomes invisible because nothing terrible happens. That absence of crisis is the achievement. Outside, a deep drift is formed against one side of the dwelling. Someone opens the entrance carefully. Cold air slips briefly inside. The person steps out carrying a simple tool. You follow at a respectful distance. Snow reaches nearly to the knees in places. The morning sky remains pale grey, and every sound feels softened beneath the fresh blanket covering the landscape. The work is straightforward. The entrance must remain usable. Snow that blocks movement can trap people inside or make essential trips much more difficult. The path is cleared, not perfectly, only enough. There is no reason to move every snowflake. Winter always leaves more. The lesson is practical rather than ambitious. Clear what must be cleared. Leave the rest alone. Nearby another family checks the roof. No damage appears. Still they inspect it. Habit replaces hope. Hope is pleasant. Inspection is warmer. The village itself seems to awaken slowly. Smoke rises from several dwellings at nearly the same time. Thin grey columns drift into the cold morning air. The sight is surprisingly beautiful. Each column represents another household where people survived another night. There is quiet comfort in that thought. You begin walking between the houses. Footprints from yesterday have disappeared beneath fresh snow. Only today's tracks matter now. Winter constantly rewrites the landscape. Paths vanish. Drifts appear where open ground existed yesterday. Frozen streams become easier to cross while muddy trails become impossible. Communities adapt continuously. You remember the different homes you've visited. The Earth Lodge, the tepi, the Longhouse, the Pueblo room warmed by yesterday's sunlight. Each would face this same morning differently. Each would rely upon its own strengths. None would rely upon luck alone. Preparation extends beyond buildings. Travel itself changes during severe winter. Experienced people understand where drifting snow becomes dangerous. They recognize frozen rivers that remain safe and those that hide flowing water beneath thin ice. They know which valleys shelter travelers from wind. They know when remaining indoors is wiser than proving courage outside. History contains countless examples where patience became a survival skill. Sometimes the smartest journey is the one postponed until tomorrow. This sounds almost disappointingly sensible. Winter has very little interest in rewarding unnecessary bravery. Fuel becomes increasingly valuable during prolonged storms. A large fire may feel comforting for one evening. If it consumes too much wood, tomorrow becomes colder. People therefore learn restraint. The hearth is fed thoughtfully. Coals are preserved. Useful heat is directed toward occupied spaces rather than wasted. You have seen this pattern throughout the journey. Conservation appears again and again. Food is preserved. Warmth is preserved. Dryness is preserved. Knowledge is preserved. Nothing essential is squandered. One fascinating aspect of many indigenous communities is how survival knowledge belonged to the entire society, rather than existing as secret information held by a few specialists. Certainly, skilled builders, hunters, or craftspeople possessed exceptional expertise, yet children learned by watching. Young people participated gradually. Stories reinforced memory. Season after season, experience accumulated naturally. You imagine a child asking why snow has been left against one side of a dwelling but removed from another. An elder explains. Years later, that child becomes the one giving the explanation. The lesson survives because it remains useful, not because it is written in a book. Historians still debate exactly how some practical skills were transmitted, because knowledge often leaves few archaeological traces. A repaired roof does not announce who performed the repair. A carefully chosen campsite rarely records the conversation that selected it. The most important winter decisions often disappear the moment they succeed. Researchers reconstruct them from comparison. Oral traditions, historical descriptions, environmental evidence, and surviving architecture. The picture grows clearer every decade. It is never completely finished. You reach the edge of the settlement where the wind becomes stronger. Almost immediately, the difference surprises you. The village itself has become a shelter. Buildings interrupt the air. Smoke marks familiar landmarks. Paths remain visible. Beyond them, open country feels far less forgiving. The contrast reminds you that communities create environments, not merely individual houses. Several families living together generate safety greater than the sum of separate shelters. Should one roof fail, neighbors can help. Should fuel run low, labor can be shared. Should illness spread through one household, others may assist. Winter encourages cooperation because isolation magnifies every difficulty. This social insulation may be impossible to measure with scientific instruments. It remains one of the strongest protections you have encountered. You pause beside a stack of carefully gathered firewood. Each piece was collected before anyone desperately needed it. That simple stack represents hours of quiet labor. Nobody applauded while it was gathered. No song celebrated each branch. Yet without it, the story would end very differently. The same can be said for drying food, repairing clothing, replacing bedding, checking smoke openings, watching children learn. History often remembers battles and rulers. Winter remembers preparation. A gentle thought comes to you. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding about historical survival is imagining that people succeeded because they were somehow tougher than modern humans. They certainly possessed remarkable resilience. But resilience alone was never enough. Knowledge mattered, community mattered, planning mattered. People survived because they understood their environment intimately and adjusted their lives accordingly. If modern people were suddenly placed into those same winters without that knowledge, determination alone would accomplish very little. Experience is a form of shelter. The storm finally ends. Clouds begin separating. Sunlight reaches the snow in scattered patches, making the entire landscape sparkle with quiet brilliance. The beauty almost hides how dangerous the night had been. Winter often does that. It offers breathtaking mornings after testing every preparation made during the previous season. The settlement slowly becomes busy again. Someone gathers more fuel. Another checks stored food. Children carry smaller bundles. Life resumes, not because winter has ended, because winter continues. The routines you have witnessed are not emergency measures. They are ordinary life throughout the cold season. That ordinary quality is perhaps the most extraordinary part. These communities transformed repeated hardship into practiced habit. The dangerous became familiar. The unfamiliar became manageable. The impossible became routine. You stand for a final moment, looking across roofs dusted with fresh snow. No house appears magical. None glows with impossible warmth, yet everyone represents generations of observation, adaptation, and practical wisdom. The title that first brought you here promised houses that never froze. Now you understand the deeper truth. The real miracle was never the temperature inside the walls. It was the knowledge inside the people. And as evening prepares to fall once more, you feel ready to return to the quiet fire where this journey began. There, with the last embers glowing softly, the story can finally come to rest. You return to the familiar hearth where your journey first began, and the fire has become little more than a circle of glowing coals. The room is quiet. Outside, snow reflects the pale light of the moon, giving the winter landscape a soft silver glow. The wind still moves across the world beyond the walls, but it no longer feels like an enemy waiting to break inside. You understand it now. Winter has not become weaker. You have simply learned how people met it. When you first stepped into this story, the title suggested an almost impossible mystery. How could Native American houses never freeze during deadly winters? The answer, as you have discovered, is more interesting than the myth. They certainly became cold. There were mornings when frost formed near entrances. There were nights when fires burned low. There were storms that tested every family and every shelter. History should never pretend otherwise. The remarkable achievement was not creating tropical comfort in the middle of winter. The remarkable achievement was designing homes that worked together with clothing, bedding, food, landscape, fire, and community so effectively that people could continue living through seasons that might otherwise have been fatal. Every lesson has quietly led you back to this single truth. The house was never expected to solve every problem alone. It belonged to a much larger system. The hill reduced the wind. The trees softened the weather. The walls slowed heat loss. The roof shed snow. The entrance limited drafts. The fire provided radiant warmth. The smoke opening allowed the house to breathe. The bed entrapped body heat. The clothing travelled wherever the person travelled. The stored food became tomorrow's warmth. The family shared labour. The village shared knowledge. Every part strengthened every other part. Remove one layer, and the rest must work harder. Keep every layer functioning together, and winter becomes survivable. You remember the Earth Lodge, resting almost like a hill beneath its heavy blanket of soil. Its massive walls changed temperature slowly, giving the fire valuable time to do its work. You remember the tipis standing proudly against the endless plains, its portable design, clever ventilation, inner liner, and carefully managed airflow proved that mobility did not require surrendering comfort. You remember the longhouse stretching through the snowy forest, where several families shared fires, stories, work, and warmth beneath one great roof. You remember the Pueblo rooms whose thick earthen walls quietly stored the afternoon sun before returning that warmth after darkness fell. None of these homes copied one another. Each belonged completely to its own landscape. That may be the greatest lesson for anyone studying history. Successful people rarely force every environment to obey the same solution. Instead, they observe. They adapt. They learn. The landscape becomes their teacher. Generation after generation, countless small discoveries become tradition. A child notices where snow drifts against the wall. An elder explains why that matters. A young builder learns which timber bends safely beneath winter weight. A hunter discovers which valley remains sheltered during a blizzard. A grandmother teaches how to prepare bedding that stays warm through the longest nights. No single lesson seems extraordinary. Together, they become civilization. Historians continue uncovering pieces of this remarkable knowledge. Every excavation reveals another floor, another hearth, another post hole, another storage pit. Each discovery fills part of the picture while leaving new questions behind. Scholars still debate exactly how certain structures were repaired, how seasonal arrangements differed, or how individual communities refined their buildings over centuries. Those uncertainties do not weaken the story. They remind us that history is still being explored. There will always be more to learn. That thought feels strangely comforting. Even after generations of research, the past continues offering quiet surprises. Perhaps that is one reason history never truly grows old. You look once more around the dwelling. The walls are still. The roof holds firm. The bedding waits where tomorrow night will find it again. Someone has already stacked another bundle of fuel beside the hearth. Another meal has been prepared for the morning. Nothing here announces itself as brilliant. Everything simply works. That quiet effectiveness deserves admiration. It reminds you that extraordinary achievements often hide inside ordinary routines, repeated faithfully over many generations. The fire finally settles into a deep bed of glowing embers. No one rushes to make it larger. There is no need. The house has done its work. The bedding will do the rest. Outside, winter continues exactly as it always has. Inside, people remain safe enough to sleep. That is the true measure of success. As your own journey through these winter homes comes to an end, you may find yourself looking differently at simple materials. A handful of dry grass, a carefully prepared hide, a layer of bark, a thick wall of earth, a bundle of firewood, a warm meal shared with family. Each seems ordinary on its own. Together, they become one of humanity's oldest and greatest survival technologies. And perhaps that is the quiet message these homes have carried across the centuries. Human beings rarely survive because of one miraculous invention. They survive because wisdom accumulates patiently, one careful observation at a time, until entire communities know how to live in harmony with even the harshest seasons. The snow continues falling beyond the walls. The fire glows softly. The voices around you fade into comfortable silence. You pull your warm covering a little closer and let the steady rhythm of the winter night settle gently around you. The storm has passed. The house stands peacefully beneath its blanket of snow, and somewhere beyond the quiet roof, spring is already making its slow journey toward another year. Take one last slow look at the glowing coals before closing your eyes. The warmth surrounding you did not come from magic. It came from countless generations of patient hands, careful minds, generous families, and deep respect for the land that sustained them. That quiet wisdom remains long after the fire itself has faded. Sleep comes naturally now, carried on the soft sound of the winter wind moving gently across the silent landscape. For a few final moments, simply rest beside the fading fire. Let the gentle crackle of the last embers become quieter with every breath. The snow outside continues falling without hurry, covering the world in peaceful stillness. The walls remain steady around you. The warm bedding holds the day's remaining heat, and the long winter night feels calm rather than threatening. Tomorrow will bring another sunrise, another fire, another shared meal, and another quiet lesson from the land, for now. There's nothing left to do except drift peacefully into sleep beneath the comforting shelter of history.